Judges and debaters, this is your 10-minute warning. We have 10 minutes until start time. Thank you.
Everyone good if I send the 1AC? Can I get a thumbs up from everyone? All right. Morbik, did you give a thumbs up? Okay. I missed that one. All right. Advantage 1 international law, Article 5, activations against non-state actors expand the international definition of self-defense contravening the ICJ's Nicaragua case, Kitrick 17. Prior to September, Committee divided world self-defense response to terrorism, if U.S. armed attack may only emanate from a state Nicaragua denied self-defense responding to terrorism, claim the right to force the committee to disapprove September 11 expanded self-defense, NAC and Post Article 5, opposite first century notion, armed attack NATO statement uses armed attack relation, all kind of the Council's reference to the right of self-defense is too ambiguous and contradictory. The president normalizes the brand of war against terrorism, Kitrick 17, brought in armed attack 2001 NATO conceptualizing time to reconcile the divergence with the ICTA current practice of terrorist trigger self-defense conditions which render responses legitimate conform to the necessity of proportionality defense might be used in a repetitive manner principle justify any abuse of sovereignty of states where terrorist network operates. That provides Israel the external legitimacy necessary to strike Hezbollah. Iran retaliate. Shalom and Collier 21 Israeli chief of staff call for preventive strike against Hezbollah, but they're striking high on the agenda. Israel's enemies are on board shape Israel facing terror armies Hamas and Hezbollah trained to invade Israel and occupy territory. Israel now occupies the attack enable IDF to hit Hezbollah rapidly. What Israel needs is legitimacy to utilize capabilities. Israel plan the combo with distinction of proportionality, extreme likelihood that attack Hezbollah to Iran military involvement. It's hard to think Iran would say passive as Israel strikes are more important ally. However, all out Israeli strikes will not allow Iran to stand aside or retaliate. Israel-Iran war goes nuclear Farley 20 or to the Israeli nuclear program land fear states with develop military advantage to the question. The other states could consider using weapons as the balance tipped out of favor. Scenario involving hostility between Israel and neighbors. Nuclear weapons remain part of the toolkit. Spills over extinction barriers 20 nuclear crisis between Israel and enemies being unique. No experts new conflict which from pandemic variables. Analysts underestimate their serious threat produce existential outcomes for the Middle East, spill over India, Pakistan, and Korea. Any cause of the threshold could use flung places that count historical ties. Obvious cases. Syria, Israeli planners calculate all hostilities center of the world. Totality Jerusalem could claim legality for its allegedly defensive strikes around civilization and progress, permitting preventative war against terrorists. Green lights Venezuelan invasion by TR in the U.S. pedo 19. There has been potential military association of Venezuela statement to the U.S. and policy of opposition to seek intervention proposal to exclude force rejected by TR presence in Venezuela of terrorist organizations such as the LNTR use of force as excuse for U.S. invasion and intervention center and TR cannot prevent the framework for force sensitive defense pact under Article 51 of the UN. There's been no arms attack by a state by discourse may shift and toast terrorist groups such as the ground is paid for intervention in pieces self-defense against terrorist groups. Discourse shifting already. Oregon noted the presence of non-state armed groups accused Maduro of clips that he uses for force and self-defense escalates to Russia war. Global 18 Moscow dispatched bombers to Venezuela. Hostility could more easily grow hot. Putin demonstrated the willingness to threaten nuke and the weakness of Russia's talk power remains the only resource Putin has that allows the status Putin is likely to repeat behavior related to war. Venezuela can be counted as an ally. Moscow dispatched nuclear capable when Russia expanding the presence in America established base one side while misread military moves to respond to escalation. Venezuelan instability spills over to make the Caribbean an international criminal hub. L-17 Venezuela instability affects Caribbean Venezuela crossing big weapons. This is a breakdown of blockage between piracy migration and Hezbollah. Iran used Venezuela as a point of entry, but Trinidad make destination of crisis of Venezuela. Deepens have destabilizing effect that facilitates global WMD attacks. Ward 14 Caribbean contributed by lack of security vulnerabilities and British stride lines from America's to Europe poses challenges gaps on the border threat. WMD entering supply or ports destined for the U.S. Caribbean staging area for criminal surprise. WMD the plan solves one prohibiting the use of force in self-defense against terrorists is key. Chicken and counter. 17 lack of clarity about Article 51 undermines the prohibition of use of force claims to be made in growing scenarios to the detriment of security. There are clear indications that dangers recognized by states as CJ and commentators. I do not underestimate the ability of terrorists who kill, but they do not threaten the life of the nation. No doubt we shall survive. Al-Qaeda was required as reinterpretation self-defense that required strengthens prohibition against any force. One way would be to decline self-defense along the lines that were originally assumed defense should only apply to attack by foreign state necessity proportionality and should be conservatively applied. U.S. interpretation of international laws models Code 16 International Committee for others from following preventative war. This more than terrorist greatest challenge to global peace. U.S. occupies the most important structural leader. U.S. has enormous influence on other and hegemon promotes a new normal competent alters the normative frame for everyone. Rules of behavior become the rules for behavior advantage to operations. Article 5 dangerously commits NATO to fight terrorism, creating a crisis of credibility. The plan's key to rebalance NATO priorities. Article 10 dysfunctional. Article 5 NATO's interest alliance needs real clarification of collective security ambiguation awful. NATO does need to chart the middle path where NATO comes to downgrade participation with NATO language. Collective security remains for a deterrent role. NATO needs to delineate with Russia as capable of countering, whereas September 11 was appropriate. NATO overextended invoking Article 5 investigation established the dangerous specific for threats. Article cover which NATO lacks expertise to deter, so talking loudly without deliver, provoke crisis credibility. Ending Article 5 is key to counter-terror. 1. Consensus is a weakness, hamstringing fast response. Denials activations are inevitable. Decking credibility. Can Article 5 limit al-Qaeda not deter by NATO or actions effective in installing attacks or took months for NATO to conform. Article 5 already waned. There was no opportunity to deploy Article 5 or wrote an invocation not provide the response immunity, delay the decision making, resolve Article 5 impossible to put into practice, getting NATO to react to an ambiguous attack would be political. This is agreement bedeviled. Article 5 in 2003 Goal 4. The German government argued inappropriate. 2. Article 5 coalitions undermine flexibility. They reduce unity and power spoils and limit cooperation with Russia. Michelet 15. Article 5 taken off the table to increase flexibility in coalition. Article 5 involve higher risk situation different than 9/11 threats. Any these complicated participation France cannot risk. Article 5 because this is so crumble question of leadership comes into play. Unlike the France could be satisfied to leave leadership to the U.S. and any NATO coalition suffer from lack leadership diminish. Article 5 U.S. share 5 ice until reinforces non-invoking and flexibility. Turkey obstacle to any coalition. Article 5 prove complicated. Turkey asks us to spoil engagement of Russia is proven a game changer. Tensions between NATO and Russia have impacted ability to act with Russia willing to cooperate with coalition. NATO scramble signals and harms discussion with Russia. Article 5 pressure the alliance are so desire by actors to put boots on the ground. 3. NATOization of counter-terror trades off with working through more effective organization. Mueller 20 NATOization of every challenge issues considered to be for your nations or other organizations that terror lumped into NATO alliance tasked with NATO with impossible undertaking weighing organization with CT will take American lead to change NATO alliance to streamline NATO responsibilities unloaded to other institutions to remain useful alliance which choose threats on every issue rises to threat terrorists were common yet Moscow posed an existential challenge or should have it and NATO was appropriate venue for terror CT or until policing counter radicalization of panics that Europe will interpol GCF UNOSC and EU more appropriate NATO's advantage lies in defense against stage choices facing NATO as the world in which NATO fails to fulfill its promise purpose strength lies in the command preserving NATO that should focus on loading responsibilities allow the alliance of focusing of Russia which requires space funding and personnel. Terrorists on the cusp of re-emergence only effective operations can subdue the ride. Rena Nashka 21 terror remains a threat mechanism to address the need of coordination decline of ISIS or coupled with ISIL across Europe, Russia, Eurasia, Africa, Asia impact even after defeation will be underestimated. Affiliates emerges to eclipse core. There's supposed to fragmentation for their operations. Governments need not to be complacent on ISIS be able to rebuild to reach even greater heights, return to the lower stage, recoup to oscillate before victory if you're not vigilant. ISIS is re-emerging. Otherwise, nuclear terrorism imminent capability will exist. So I-16, ISIS to acquire new crisis hiding in program list is possible. ISIS attracted engineers as recruits the backbone of the team to construct INDs, colonic countries with global smuggling. ISIS could acquire the blueprints that remains. Reactors that use HEU processes not beyond the capability of actors. Al-Qaeda involved in extracting heroin user resistant database that recorded 1,088 times around the Wexley right for the unregulated material third of the world's HEU neglect to make it difficult for the West to assist those seeking WMT would deem it optimum black market space nuclear smuggling with other goods. Sparks nuclear war, buries 19 terror spark nuke war terror hosted in a state in response to the public with the government strike terror strongholds the region of blaze the U.S. reacts to chain reaction to conflict that consume every nuke state would entomb the species humankind's last calamity include atmospheric effects reduce ozone drop temperature irreversible shifts that cannot be ruled out the effect of rendering the entire planet a hotspot. Same with bio and cyber terror collapses global agriculture. Charia 17 chemical bio radio terrorism. Al-Qaeda and ISIS have an interest in capability want to cry attack hackers to control the computer terrorists copy the tech to use cyber capabilities and ag in one click destroy the harvest precision farming trends nations ag other tech as CRISPR makes it expensive to design bioweapons prior to CRISPR DNA required labs experience PhD CRISPR available for less than 150 terrorists could alter the bird flu including humans Washington defense efforts on no pathogens the growth of the biotech makes it cited the government can be held to ransom as ag right through pre-internet technology scale makes policing every piece of land impossible engineer pathogens cause extinction far wild all 17 pathogens killed our hosts before they spread breach overcome the trade-off research demonstrate the ability of altering pathogens to create strains with new features with the potential to kill billions engineer pathogens to real humanity cost of the tech is falling and expertise becoming available terrorist capacity to create pathogens existential ag collapses existential council law 17 U.S. competition with Russia China conspire we face strife famine refugee challenges food security is imperative insecurity leads to instability drive migration generating conflict volatility toward the protests and rise prices drive of Arab Spring is unquestionable for stability population will grow by 2.5 billion situation requiring the deployment of our military cyber terror triggers attacks on critical infrastructure on level 20 cyber terror attack computer network security risks go beyond the boundaries threat and vulnerabilities constitute security risks with confronting all nations law enforcement found little answer cyber attacks on critical infrastructure only a matter of time it solves non-linear extinction risks strong critical infrastructure Pamela and Armstrong 15 risks threaten Cuban civilization parts become vulnerable and connected to a reinforcing risk against predators build over and critical infrastructure fault disruption cause a non-linear effect networks are strongly coupled in this fight with global digital governance human inadequate failure cascade infrastructure damage may trigger social collapse for out of proportion to initial disruption secondary effects complex starvation cause great death collapse could spread and undermine the combating ecosystem collapse loss of trade poverty wars climate change and monocultures referencing international law the United States government should substantially reduce its alliance commitments with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization member states by at least limited conditions under which its defense pact can be activated in response to terrorist attacks by non-state entities. Back to international law. Intervention causes state failure. Romanek 17 HMI worsen between corruption, rights versus alienation of population, terrorists bring destruction out, government backsliding to failed state, to failing state, caught in the terrorist dissidents, engage in escalating conflict, existential Krasner 18, civil war impacts of terrorism, pandemic, instability, and great power conflict, crises, productive choices that were made by industrialized companies. The impact spread, great power competition are likely in areas afflicted by strife because appeals from local actors.
Okay, we're gonna take some prep.
Mhm.
Okay, we stopped at 7:52. Are you good for projects, Brendan? One sec.
Yes.
Okay.
I had to switch monitors.
Sure. The first question, the plan text, what constitutes a non-state entity?
An entity that is not affiliated with the state.
Do proxy organizations without official ties to governments count as non-state entities post-plan?
Kelly?
It would depend on, so basically the Nicaragua decision had a specific test to determine whether or not those proxy organizations are part of the state. If it passes like the certain tests that Nicaragua does set out, then no, because then they would count as under state entities.
Okay, so, all right, that's fine. The second advantage, the coalitions that the plan claims to create for counterterrorism, what is the difference between them and existing NATO operations aimed towards counterterrorism?
Well, one, they're outside of NATO completely. It uses the EU, UN, etc. Two is that they no longer require on consensus decision making.
Okay, is the United States involved in these coalitions?
I imagine so.
Okay. Which evidence says that those coalitions form as a consequence of the plan?
The Mahler card.
The Mahler card is a criticism of the NATOization of security challenges. What evidence says that ending Article 5 ends sort of the NATO framework for counterterrorism?
For the reverse causal cards, probably the echo cards.
Echo just says consensus-based approaches don't really work. This is in the context of Article 5.
I disagree.
Why is Article 5
it advocates a U.S. role for changing NATO operations.
You've not highlighted the phrase U.S. or America or anything like it in this card.
Also, like the Mueller card does make a reverse causal claim. It says the reason why people are not working under international institutions is, quote, because the NATOization of every challenge meant issues considered the purview of nations where other organizations such as here are now lumped into NATO's agenda.
It also says it will take American leadership to change NATO's future course.
The NATOization is not constrained to Article 5. It is not not an Article 5 obligation to engage in counter-terror missions with NATO. So
Well,
how
it
does
is
just
actually-
ending
you're
Article
factually
5
wrong about
spill over
that.
to all of that?
You're actually factually wrong. The legal basis for all out-of-area operations is Article 5, so contravening Article 5 is sufficient to end all of that.
Well, the plan contravenes Article 5's activation. It does not contravene the applicability in other regions. And if NATO countries have an incentive to do that,
It's
why
like,
wouldn't
we
they
will
find
re-ev
other
on
avenues?
this.
to
You
plan?
will not win this argument. Like, there is a legal basis for this. You will not win this.
What is the legal basis?
Like, the activation of Article 5 created the legal basis for OAOs. We have cards, you don't. Like,
What card says that?
we'll read it in the 2AC if you make
Okay,
the
so it's
argument.
okay. The first advantage, U.S. unilaterally has done stuff against terrorism. Why is the plan solve?
Well, it solves because it constrains U.S. action and sets an international precedent.
Okay.
I'm sending it. Just my computer load. Round 8. Okay, it should be sent. While I get set up, it's 8 international law, and then operations. Can you change the mic? Okay. I'll take off my chip. Some other place. Is everybody good? Yeah. Post office infrastructure day by PC passive infrastructure for the keys. Oh, sorry.
I'll just restart. Sorry about that. Cool. First office infrastructure day by PC passive infrastructure for the keys. Commanders. Take us to 26 infrastructure passive commanders. By will have momentum. The moment rapid responding to steps already. High improvement. You most conservative. You spend big. Slowly difficult. How to pass quickly through thin marches and need more to prove you cannot China. The 5G battery manufacturing. Capacity fast aggressive bad with stronger reluctant to see this face as success. I'm also passing are very good. The plan trades off pillar. A pillar 20 inter divisions arrested their major reduction was present by with limited PC. Bandwidth and increased sales expenditure time attention class restructure. The competition will be fierce to other parties for erratic. Weaken the press should not be mistaken. What issues are asking for everything else restrained addressing other tasks will face appear slow and extinction bears 20 week and our pressure bedrock. Although no strength be powerful to US service money of legitimacy and international standing America need a dark strategy said though other infrastructure strong military yet it's not enough for some prosperity must be shared in mobility and great credible for values and model set the stage for the leadership strong recovery short ability strong geopolitical challenges opposition strength and also address global crisis climate pandemic refugees yes and tools next up is the con with the United States limited constitutional convention cover at least 34 of the states and ratify at least 38 of the states reduces lines with the North Atlantic Union Station member states by reducing by at least limiting the conditions under which offense can be advocated in response to terrorist attacks by the Nazi entities society international law. The next off is the MOU count upon the United States or government should submit a memorandum of understanding to the North Atlantic Union Station says that limits the conditions under which this attack can be advocated in response to terrorist attacks by Nazi entities or from the international law. The account results in identical US policy without reducing commitment by issuing guidance that clarifies obligations within the terms of the Alliance Post Act 20. There was to adapt instruments to vendor clarify alliances eliminate teams similar to renegotiation treaty itself. However, since language is vague more a practical creation of clarifying issues under the treaty amendments of formally documents and informal like constitutional reputational checks and negotiations proven not to supplement existing laws instead of separate framework independent nations so laws more instead simply guidelines that represent de facto clarification costs for every owner everyone to the alliance to clarify values manage expectations for when and how we'll hide out capabilities places and starting point others to formalize once we publish the guidelines provide a constant reference to allies and avoids politics so attending guidance talks without trackless attention not subject to procedural requirements of political branches agencies without advanced publicity therefore set a new state that's what we're weapons mobilizes and generate feedback by contrast agencies commission during 30 notice of complex escalates or rules around interest opposition which are lost in congressional interest next up is substantially limited across their broad restrictions exclude single conditions and another one substantial limitations and when we want to restrict broad range of various classes and moving for single job size substantial limitations the plan poses a limited condition on the cross work constraint neg limits there are thousands of minor modifications based on average type of convent locations to other demands that undermines death makes meaningful prep impossible next obviously Article 5 pick the United States government should respond to the invocation of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty against non-state actors with measures short of military force, prohibit unilateral use of force in self-defense against terrorists, and form non-Article 5 counter-terror coalition with NATO member states. Next up is the NDT. Canada, the United States government should propose the North Atlantic Council revisional alliance policy to limit conditions in which defense act can be activated in response to terrorist attacks by non-state entities, referencing international law. The Canada competes and solves the case. Just organization will be adopted by the NDT becoming effectively binding on all members, but the process of legislative formulation without setting prior fixed policy to legitimacy acceptance for 19. NATO's mechanism consultations are unique. The NDT above all make a limited possible insurance embedded deliver against all social character, regulation, legitimate consequences of agreement, and shared endeavor to rules or stagnant reliable means of getting out into the line vehicle within which events have been articulated modified American state captured proven effective navigation to allied business. Next up is the assurance that the plans of unilateral reinterpretation of Article 5 of Europe will renew this time of overall disengagement cost of nuclear proof has 19. US get easy fluid source of water negotiations by Article 5 state limits to negotiate fundamental parameters. Washington should try to reassure of what overly unilateral decision making of an alienation, especially for arguments that you trust. Listen for your ready signals, especially for hospital, even only specific issues, study the intently unrestrained eligible of cost of nuclear Acts 18. Hey David, get me the economist card. I'm gonna have a shitload of time. Act 18 leaving with force EU because also MBT disintegration lead the country all over pursuing New America. Minister of Europe has most reference all of the what the European nuclear shield article 5 strike upon the lost budget professor UK space cables in Germany. The ability to fight a proposition resulting Mistrust going to attempt to strike absence of supercharged global proliferation, not the ability to cause nuclear wrecking NATO. And next up is the T limit conditions. Limit speeds reduce the currently existing condition. Gruner 10 limited because something to take her holder. The statute uses just the raw waters must be already be providing services and condition activation defense are those explicitly specified in writing in the terms of the agreement. Bogart 14 unless you reserve formal contracts stability conditions under which the constitution are activated, explicit records specified conditions under which obligations are activated. Violation that's Article 5 for NATO, but NATO cannot invoke Article 5 for terrorist attacks. Bracket 16 of NATO organizes response to terrorist attack only after Article 51 of the UN Charter or Chapter 7 authorizes security council. Commentators often invoke Article 5 as authority. Under a misunderstanding of meaning and utilities provision, vote next for NATO limits on defense facts are infinite, non-documented, making research and debate impossible. It's another offer, just case stuff. Okay, cool. Yeah. Another off. David will send this out. Referencing. Scroll down. Yep. Where is it? David, it just. Oh. Yeah. I'll go to case. International law advantage. The plan does not stop U.S. intervention. It's entirely legal. Probably without the need for permission. 19 faith appears to restrict your barrier or social media space. I was permitted to come to the defense outside in NATO for failure to force what device. So key lessons of War II of the collective action required approval of an NAC. U.S. remains free to exercise defensive action and action. This included a defense from allies of states outside the NATO framework. And U.S. international law feels it deeply ingrained hypocrisy and range of issues. Fuller 23-22. Washington was certainly making other countries test and sound American vision. Hypocrisy is disturbing against policy over 20 years to kill. Consider Iraqi, Syrian, Somalia, Libya, Iranian, Afghanistan, Pakistani collateral damages, endless interventions, assassinations such as Soleimani. Washington extended rights to Saudi Arabia, sexual included color revolutions that refuse to allow to see or rights in the shadow by ICJ. Violations are notable in the US and globally, but there's no impact as ILO suits this. Hike in 12. Whether violations are perpetrated every power by every day, and the ILO does not use it on a daily basis. Five principle ever. Wars, aggression, drone attacks, renditions, assassinations, sales of weapons, and large person populations. Lists endless laws exist in theory, but are not practiced, nor by superpowers enforcement. No military force praying for rain as effective as exciting international law. Principles of law. Those president is resilient. Single violations don't cause collapse. And US is in key coup. 17. The Western are left to take leadership in ILO coalition. Others may step in negotiations concerning nuclear ban treaty taking place by Western powers efforts. Joe Commons and actors and North Rogers in your service existing structures things that were Trump CETA does a clear statement against access for structure. There would never be some decay of national laws, but unlikely to demise the global constitution. Other elements of decay are complemented by reconfiguration, innovation, and also Middle East wars more likely than ever. Call in 19 interstate capital cities around the U.S. has been replaced with subsidies. Threats to other regions taking more important diversification, energy, we can oil during the Cold War. Traditional threats to which role after the real systems U.S. contain Israel. Israel kind of set up both a person that remove others to some Arab states that thinks these chances of war are lower than any time in 20 years. And also Trump solves the impact because Biden solves the impact because he'll conduct strikes on Iranian proxies anyways for Israel. It's never going to be escalatory proven, and it means that they try to say it's solved obviously, and the impact concerned about it. Only eviction solves hemispheric SOI competition. Chang 2-8. Russia and China to resolve crisis. They had to leave Latin America. Something to decades. So it's not likely they want to contest the theater outreach with the Junites. That Russia and China have control to play. There's a drill danger. US everything to loosen the realistic gains of China. Russia make a no global problem better. The only sense of person within our hemisphere. The place begins by the way it turns their impact point everywhere. Lindsay and Equipment mentioned 14 about Latin America. Great powers. Could explain we need to secure intelligence states within it to threaten the US security. It's splitting right opportunities for major rivals and interpose a return to heighten competition among great powers. Major Beijing and Moscow based in Latin America lead to direct competition with nuclear power. Right, US would invade multiple disincentives to do so. That was all their cards about Trump rhetoric, not the status quo. No Russia isolation. But anyways, Mac Farquhar 19 Venezuela and South Syria separated by thousands of solutions. Allied regional power with Russia, the economy suffering and immediately means this word another overseas adventure to Syria. Russia could deploy air forces or cruise missiles. Russia graduates and promise to help with demonstrations. Russia will not fight you unless the government backs it. Maduro then anyway, intervention for sailing in the continent. The operations advantage. NATO is resilient past decades of improvement, even if there's some dislocation over certain issues. Their card also lists other instances such as energy security and other broader hybrid conflicts between terrorism is insufficient to access it. That's their evidence. New terror to retail. No, Macintosh story 18. Even the one case where natural especially requires a nuke and primarily seeks strategies. Other strategies more appealing. CBRW easy over time to procure, produce. Unlike a nuke attack, RW starts more credible. Again, a precipitate follows a single attack might a harder result this time. And money and infrastructure to build the risk of discovery. Terror groups unlikely to exchange these program to engage in risk. Risk efforts to process. The nuclear type effects on population support. Nuclear effects and sort of dynamics would be divisive. That's what the organizational finance would be where 100 would be at no means or motive. Mueller 18, a terror groups of villages decided to go nuclear less for progress and showing construction collaboration transporting guarded materials, sophisticated shop moving into nations while highly fast. Goes around and allocated a because no country wants to be a blame nor they're likely to still able to still all take the security seriously. And also they've not read a card that says that Europe or NATO is necessarily key to any of this. Terrorist attacks that occur via the Philippines or all of it throughout all of East Asia. Impact terrorists, all those things are all causes to their impact. No bioweapons. Let's 17, no pathogens, sophisticated weapons. The terrorists be attempted to be concerted, use widely available. It's not a conventional view. Even contemplated using bio. Issues likely to do with using support of any stable use of the norm. And there's absolutely zero impact to agricultural terrorism. Canada spread rapidly. It doesn't go global. No food wars anyways. Food of SB 18. A little scholar merit that a reduction in food increases probability conflict will break out to a state. So a start of conflict requires a means to build people who are breaking starvation opposition resort to widespread by cyber hedges. Also investment appears out high prices of related to shortages sources of discontent or more complex and political structures and land corruption, democratic reforms and economic problems and global food supplies high and resilient that means that they can't go Connie 15 yields at global production increase in recent available supplies increase of 44%. Hunger decline by 170 million despite population increases occurred despite diversity land high fleets and no cyber terror impacted Mueller 21. Disruptions were instrumental. The existential cyber society, the more dangerous threats of big constraint has yet to kill. America's unimpressive. Alchemist by squirrels and jellyfish and no terrorists. Unless successful attack at U.S. experts hundreds of thousands of limited defensive effects. And there are easier methods of hacking and far more reliably. The advantage
At a point, United States government should no longer participate in or advocate for out-of-area operations.
The United States federal government should no longer participate in or activate
participate in or
should no longer participate in or advocate for NATO out-of-area operations.
That was on the advantage.
That was on the advantage counter plan, and I will write that and send that right now for process. While David switches the mic.
Yeah, if you could send that, that'd be nice.
Yep. I'm just going to tack it on as a plank to the counter plan.
Yeah.
Okay. I just tacked it on as the last plank to the counter plan. It should be sent. I'm good for cross-ex whenever.
Yeah, my email hasn't updated or anything. Okay. I just got it. Okay. You ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, the memorandum counter plan.
Mhm.
What happens if allies disagree with the memo?
I'm confused. What do you mean allies disagree with the memo? I think that operates on the same assumption if the allies, whether or not they disagree with the plan. I'm
Okay.
confused by the question. Maybe David could better answer this, but it's like, yeah.
I mean, it's not cooperative. It's the United States issues a memo that this is now the official U.S. policy. If allies
Okay.
disagree, they can't disagree because the United States has just told them that. Like, they can't disagree that the United States believes now that Article 5 does not apply. So,
Gotcha.
not cooperative.
The advantage counter plan. What are the non-Article 5 counterterror coalitions?
What are the non-Article 5 counterterror coalitions? Actually, this is like a factual claim. Every single current counterterror operation, so the missions we're conducting in the Mediterranean and all the previous ones have actually operated outside of the Article 5 framework. So they're all actually non-Article 5 operations, and we can produce a piece of evidence about this because this is a factual statement.
Okay. Prohibit unilateral use of force in self-defense against terrorists. Would this be in conjunction with Article 51 of the UN?
It would relate to, unless David has something else, it would probably relate to us reinterpreting the stipulations under Article 51 of the UN Charter, yes.
Cool.
And domestic policy, and within domestic policy.
Okay, and what's the net benefit of this counter plan?
The assurance, yeah.
Okay, and this is not a unilateral reinterpretation of Article 5. Why?
Because it's if you're referring to the first plank changes our response, doesn't change our actual commitment. And we'll read it more later. That distinction even further
but
clear.
Article 5 says meet the common danger, right?
Yeah,
So
but it doesn't specify how.
words.
It does not specify how you'd meet the common danger. It is left open for interpretation for treaty allies to have to dictate how they would respond.
Right, and Article 5 doesn't crisply define every case in armed attack, right? Both are vague words in Article 5. Okay, so the conclusion is both are unilateral.
Well,
the link differential is only by the specific words in Article 5.
No, I mean, the counterplan is actually like empirically proven. When the United States activated Article 5 in Afghanistan, I think Italy and France, or Italy and one other country, used an interpretation of Article 5 that mirrored the counterplan to say that they had activated it, but really pretty much just like supported the United States through statements. They did not use any military action because it was not domestically possible politically. Like,
okay, the Tankersley card. Would infrastructure happen through reconciliation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
What Dems defect?
The primary one would probably Manchin and any other sort of conservative.
Really, Manchin? I want a $3
Casey
trillion
as well.
infrastructure deal. Manchin.
Cinema or Casey as well. They all could possibly defect. Our Tankersley evidence indicates that Manchin, despite his recent statements, means he's more likely to vote for infrastructure, but Biden still needs to sort of get him on board, and the plan causes defections.
We'll take prep.
Quick thing. Did you read the CMR, DA?
I did not read the DoD stuff.
That's what I thought. I just want to double check.
Okay, stop prep. We have 7:13. I'm sending it out now. Okay, the order is international law, operations, T substantially limit, T conditions, the MOU counterplan, the advantage counterplan, the NAC counterplan, con, assurance, politics.
I'm sorry, could I get that again?
Yeah, let me just set up the stand and then I'll. Okay, the order is international law, operations, T substantially limit, NAC, con, assurance, politics.
Wait, sorry. For me, at least, it cut out in the middle. Can you say the? Can you like say the
Yeah.
off order again?
Yeah, me too.
So international law, operations, T substantially limit, T conditions, MOU counterplan, advantage counterplan, NAC counterplan, con counterplan, assurance, politics. Also, if my internet like cuts out in the middle, just like let me know and I'll pause. Okay. Is anyone not good? Okay. I'll start. If there are no objections. Okay. They have dropped the Caribbean impact that causes WT proliferation around the world and causes attacks on the U.S. infrastructure and, as well as other countries, causes nuclear extinction. The plan stops U.S. intervention immediately illegal against terrorists who use self-defense. There will be unsolved. The U.S.-led ILO regime works when U.S. influence stalls. They have leverage over allies like Saudi, Israel, and NATO to force compliance with the evidence. No hypocrisy over CT. So it's irrelevant to its empirics. No one thought that self-defense encompassed terrorism until the U.S. acted. Its history evidence violations are inevitable, and ILO resilience are irrelevant. Only violations to counter-terror law are key. Everyone does follow on their doesn't assume the U.S. compelling behavior change, not just following norms because they feel like a yes, Middle Eastern war won. Their does not assume Israel striking Iran's ally Hezbollah, who said Israel's nukes are part of the toolkit. Experts underestimate the risk. That's partly embarrassed evidence. The eviction chart is not a scenario. We do not kick the U.S. out of the region to stop U.S. intervention. They're wrong. They read the wrong. They read the wrong turn to the wrong impacts. Yes, U.S. invasion, TR, and the U.S. both use the precedent established by Article 5 to attack terrorist groups in Venezuela. Will to invade exists. It's evidence, yes, Russia war. There does not assume U.S. invasion of a Russian ally or Russian deployment of a strategic nuclear bomber and base in Venezuela gives Russia unique stakes and forces escalation tensions. Inevitable or not responsive. No reason why any of those go nuclear. Biden does not solve TR invades, and the U.S. has its defense pact with them, which means that he has to get intervenes. The operations advantage, yes, nuke terror and impact there. Does not assume safe havens protecting terrorists from backlash. South Africa proves that its possible capability exists. Plus, C reactors are vulnerable. ISIS engineers and Al Qaeda knows how to develop nuclear tech. That's the IWA's evidence. Yes, nuke terror impact causes U.S. to react with nukes, ensuring instability draws another great powers causes nuke winter. That's the Burroughs evidence. Yes, spy terror CRISPR makes capabilities cheap and easy, and ransomware attacks prove terrorists have the skill. That's Atari evidence. Yes, ag impact of cascades triggers global war with Russia, China while instigating civil unrest and refugees versus U.S. nuclear interventions. That's the Tesla. Yes, cyber terror and impact. 1 impairs previous ransomware attacks prove the skill is out of area. 2 threshold of slow critical infrastructure and ag about to detect overcharge protections and dangerous dependence on the internet. That's Atari. Not the EU is not the only internal link. Interpol, Europol, and the OSCE are all other all causes that are able to solve. T substantially limit plumate plants into vacuum substantially limit success considerable excluding minor quantities substantially limit success considerable zipping substantially considerable names substantially limits the matter way per station. Sold 2 to 14. This is limited cannot be used to be willing to substantially to this to the Congress with the amendment of the definition of shorter in favor of broad coverage. Afghan termination makes the after depicts and intrudes the literature to next landed arbitrariness rejects interrupts divorce from the topic context unpredictable rules global to undermine the word the lit function limits like solvency ethics and advantage area checks feasibility goodness enough. T conditions we need 1 plan text in a vacuum. 2 it's permanent right reduces the lens commit to unconditionally defend needed against terrorists counter to reduce means to source of phrases to reduce to zombie to cancel print not but diminish in alliance literature. 8 top defines conditions under which at least 18 8 top stands with their steps and further news standing up with alliance policies for the charter years top first the condition on which obligation activities limiting refers to 8 situations. The F limits the first and the 7th least at all 10 obligations for the defense limit the adversary to look specific conflict vital also the harms with the adversary for single public specific games such as the conflict with the mutual agreement situation one things the partners attack the obligation A versus the combination for the rebel parties using the alliance commitments. F innovation topic is decisively next by statistics prove more absent innovation predictability only read evidence about alliances prereq to limits function limits attack, cross-applied, and reasonability. The MOU counterplan perm to both, it shields the link to politics because it's perceived as the same thing and in line in enforcement of the counterplan perm to the F through the process of the counterplan perm to the counterplan. It does not compete any NAC deficit applies because countries would veto perm to the counterplan. Also, counterplans that result in the F or voter kill staff count. We can't leverage our advantages. They artificially create a net benefit. It cannot solve one signaling. The counterplan's irregular process cannot send a durable signal to delay wars are escalating now. Counterplan takes too long. 3, it cannot solve because Article 5 was already invoked. MOU says that if things are invoked in the future, we don't have to, then we shouldn't activate it in the future. But the point of our advantage is that Article 5 has already been activated in the past. So future denials cannot solve. We have to roll back all the past policies as well as it also links to the net benefit. It is still controversial, which means that if the link is correct, then Congress would still backlash. Also, condo is better undermines clash and curses bad positions, kills, but dispossessed our offense. Also, it's non-binding, no enforcement effort. And now, also, 15. Guidance is to show whether agency wishes to clarify existing regulation, kind of time, post the wish for the others to fully clarify the guidance that legal binding can be equal. Determine what they're talking about, like, how the guidance of our education, the guidance of the two qualities, best practice, question members, emerita, backlash, and confusion, KB, 15 legal language, whether you can be using all confusing here's guidance of the college, information, elections, guidance, and justice, they were looking guidance, and now she's launching all the staff for transition for the pages, confusing steps, of actions, interpretation, directive, moralities, instructions, spreader of the websites and pages we do. Now, she works with the guidance is supposed to tell me that you need to knowledge with the regulatory side to understand the advantage term plan perm to both. Now, the first plank, it cannot solve because it leaves in place Article 5, so it cannot solve either advantage, but it links to the net benefit, even if Article 5 allows non-military responses, excluding the military option is perceived by Europe as winning. The defense maximum is 16 defense clause guarantees to search the scope of the departing by Article 5 U.S. preferred broad language as well as political differences. Europe claimed that landing on military with the fact that the U.S. claimed that this country language to lose for the attacks and unrealistic for the U.S. attack, something different than armed support. The second plank, if it does spill over to all of ILAW, it links to the net benefit and perm to the counterplan. All Article 5 invocations are just invocations of Article 51. If the counterplan clarifies that it does the Article 16 military weapons with the charges they have to enter Article 51 with the U.S. Charter Convention if they invoke Article 5 legal authority. Common misunderstanding NAC offers to take part in the object rather than NATO is a mutual defense of the Article 51 authorizes the use of force themselves without authorizing NATO members for 2. This convincing NATO limiting Article 5 is key. 1, ILAW, every link of the 1AC references NATO to Article 5 invocations as turning point for the doctrine. Walking it back is key. Magado 18 question whether that self-defense with their ICJ their self-defense only cruise arms have the rights to the 51 was not versus for the seats to not recognize the self-defense is turned over the majority of the legitimacy are friend futures have prevented self-defense rolled out. However, the United Martin turning point and guiding debate as part of that armed attack the Nazi recognition of the private action of the armed attack revolutionary NATO which is from the new formulation from the 9/11 armed attack attacks could be regarded as attacks covered Article 5 2 operations ending Article 5 is key to flexible operations avoid consensus and prioritize other more capable institutions per into the counterplan. The last links about U.S. doing counterterror. It cannot solve operations. 1, it leaves in place the NATO framework, hamstrings American responses. 2, NATOization trades off with non-military solutions. Those are key. London 20. U.S. focus on preemptive priorities outside with the inflexibility. U.S. fund trading tools, dispensing holistic risk might be missing top part Al Qaeda relates to socialist person imparting assets which operate the independence of transition to alter our view, cut the card, alter our view the NAC counterplan. Perm do both. It's also because the perm would ask the NEC whether they have to continue perm to the counterplan. Alice say no. 1, expedition Alice Johnson 10 Alice with the expectation of the US, the UK, Netherlands, Canada, Denmark, the driving person in the NATO OA where the surface they efforts to reinforce the Arctic bloc, the increase in NATO presence in the periphery. 2, NATO NEC system permit 20 with the preemption they met original flight times of the A5 the mission the apparatus surveillance NEC answer the what we search necessary to collect the substance perm to the AFN proposed a revision perm to the AFN proposed a revision for non-state actors perm to the AFN proposed a revision over lines commitments consensus is bad. 1, hamstrings C2 responses impacted by the entire 1AC. 2 is that undermines NATO credit triggering strategic autonomy because countries cannot unite for support. Also, it can't spill over, cannot ensure continuous NAC usage. The Hong Kong counterplan perm to beds just shields the lake because the AF is compliance with the convention perm to the counterplan of literary certainty links to the federal 18. There's nothing because of the convention based and there's a lot of way the special issue of the constitution and polarization the rules the convention where you can reply to no to legislative executive where the authorities to solve this opening process to chaos project the legal bodies for the democracy and there's no process to applications. Con is a voter fails away a solvency deficit is not logical no actor has a choice assurances that cases of straight that's up to 1 consensus-based activation denial is inevitable. 2, NATO stocks on counter-terror forces of crisis and credibility. 3, forces focus on counter-terror clauses NATO Baranowski and Lenin 19. Anti-terror requires many ways of being either deploying persons military weapons in the U.S. to very long-term connectivity renewal for NATO CC. The NATO is nuclear alliance to turn the competitors NATO false Article 5 that do not pair with the consistent Russian methods of CT because the whole rapid activity for the criminals of military NATO LPS CT is more natural for the EU. London tech for the constitutional defense focus on coordinated to turning Western defense. NATO purpose of single more for the alliance for the EU would feel more advanced strategic alternatives defense whatever Europeans for the more not be enough fulfill 360 to cut the card. They are also allies like the F1. They're against invocation. They think it undermines flexibility. 2, they're against responding to Article 5. Number 15, France looking to the EU against IS Europe position for the Euro War 20 solid and military support that Italy was not aware contract to the coalition to Spain, which of the war time Spain and Netherlands are confronted Poland over the assistance France. Jose Mission to first amendment to Europeans do not agree. Back channel Slav explains the out to allies. EU fails in April 19 turning to NATO Article 5 maybe over the wake of terrorist attack Paris, and the EU message of them wants to issue with a more to the EU of the US guarantee echo with the German translate global basis for the EU NATO to also the Washington Street no uniqueness denials to Article 5 to Turkey Estonia 2003 2007 2016 no impacts Strider 20 a bond stabilizing to deter the country long peaceful of every the non-robust standards to deter the net effects scores of those spread undertaking that below the weapons cut the card below the weapons politics decide. Ending overseas planets bipartisan council in Wilson 20 forever was red hair was a framing partisan CT overshadowed no link does not need to be Congress fiat solves a link no bill takes mass numbers and waters out Fossil 327 they're not in a process for the main with the infrastructure partnership with the meeting have a public where the killings restructured ban of rifles and barrier checks in the crisis of border was spending with a war with a division the purpose of why the opposed to taxes see the versus spending defense massive spending of the houses are uncertain moderate James bill gets water then final outcome is equally now get somebody will be least the economy uncertain for months bill comes to focus late September border thumper is obviously if the border fights cause the thumper Afghan withdrawal true word 3 minutes for the course of August was divided the troops Afghan sit down opposition group they are starting this is helping by list of America's military business Biden can implement it there is executive action no impacts well 20 I do not think the econ impacts its depressions cause the war there will be more the US is over the 40 at the 20 wars that unrelated to econ the absolute leaders of the war uncertain no better econ the leaders will not go to war in the cheap quake and the success motive basis security econ every war there's a preventive war conquest econ is only one factor of any money that barely significant economy not likely to affect war.
You good for cross-ex?
Yeah.
Okay. So first, NAC counter plan. Before the say no cards, what were all the arguments you made? Like I didn't catch them really.
Perm do both. Shields solves the net benefit because the perm asks
Okay.
whether the NAC they asks the NAC whether the app should continue. Perm do counter plan and then cards.
And then the cards. Okay, cool. I want to talk about the advantage counter plan, the non-military solutions card. Which plank, like, why does the first plank of the counter plan not solve this?
Well, the first plank of the counter plan just says, well, the first plank of the counter plan definitely links to the net benefit because, you know, it tells Europe that it denies military support.
Sure.
But second and more importantly is that the 1AC Michelet evidence says leaving in place the framework of Article 5 undermines flexibility because it means that countries like Russia that oppose NATO enlargement will no longer join counter-terror missions, which means that the chance of those missions succeeding decreases dramatically. And if Article 5 missions exist, it creates the possibility of allied spoilers like Turkey that will eventually prevent those missions from succeeding.
So which card do you have that is uniqueness that says that ongoing NATO counter-terror operations are operating within the Article 5 framework?
Yeah, so both the Michelet, Updo, and like the Mueller evidence says that there has been a NATOization of all counter-terror missions in which all of them
NATOization, but like, yeah, they're like doing it in NATO. That does not mean they've activated Article 5 over it.
So
Like,
again, this begs the question of what, David asked in 1AC Cross-Ex. All the legal basis of all of those missions is Article 5. We have a card on this. You did not make the argument. You want to overread a card if you do make it.
Got it. The NAC counterplan, France says no. The card does not say the word Article 5. Okay, you didn't read that? Cool. The expeditionary allies say no, just as they want to increase the credibility of Article 5 on the periphery. Why is that relevant to the question of counter-terror operations?
Well, the NAC, like if you propose the aft to the NAC, it would essentially be asking the NAC, hey, is it okay if we end the legal basis for all CT OOAs? Obviously, if these allies support OOAs, they would say no to that.
And then you also said that the EU, that the allies prefer using the EU instead of the NATO framework. Can you reconcile those two things?
Well, the thing is that they would prefer using NATO in most instances, but if forced to choose, they are more than willing to use the EU as well.
Well, no, it says that
so
after
if they
Paris,
have the option of vetoing,
it says that after the 2015 terrorist attacks,
they would obviously veto it. But if we undermine the Article 5 regime, they also have other options.
So my problem with this is that the Pro card is about how in 2015, when the attacks occurred on Paris, instead of the French government or any of Europe deciding to use Article 5, they chose to use the EU instead. Like, why do any of them care about the Article 5 provision for terrorism then?
Well, this card is talking about. Wait, what do you mean? Like, the point is that they right now, like, they want to maintain the option of Article 5. Obviously, the EU is another option that they could potentially turn to. That doesn't mean that they're going to, negate the NATO option altogether. Just because they turn to the EU once doesn't mean that they don't want NATO at all.
Okay, 752. Okay, 439. I'll send the cards. Sent. Let me get set up. My camera's not on.
Okay, it looks like there's Harry. Okay. Order the NAC counterplan, the advantage counterplan, the con counterplan, the MOU counterplan, the international law advantage, the operations advantage. Does anybody need any part of that again? Okay. Can I have a thumbs up from everybody? They're ready to go. Wonderful. All right. The counterpoint solves the whole case. It recommends revision of the Defense Pact for the North Atlantic Council in a way that mirrors the plan. They'll accept codifying the policies and its formal posture that changes the meaning of Article 5 will be complied with by every member. That solves one. It functionally changes U.S. policy. The revision becomes embedded in the policy of all allies, so it'll shape U.S. action. That's Sperling. Every country follows on. Becker 20 planning is key to create effective allies and influence one another's and influence others' planning. Examples of pledge effective planning about even countries who resist incorporated national planning and allies incorporate NATO governments and strategy to collaborative decision making leaves Article 5 intact. Anderson 13 U.S. and NATO are able to iron over differences. Allies generally even luckily accept U.S. alliance policies reflect the fact the U.S. representative struggle from the defense objections and concerns or any changes apply alteration U.S. resolve values or the developments of target nation regardless of how to lead allies to watch from the status change in the eyes of leaders if surprised by should they conclude their views were not even important allies have a sense that changes cascade throughout the entire system debate but rarely oppose U.S. results. Changes can ensure the result of resistance is not change impossible. And if it doesn't align the opponents to close consultation in face of altering strategies. 3, the outcome is the same in the process avoids the perception of U.S. unilateralism. Ghana 14 behavior rub your problem with when the Amendment revealed privately upon but in fact the U.S. abandoned consultation said the decision was not negotiable. Should even close allies relations be better served approach that would allow the outcome to emerge naturally from consultative extensive forming process. Final result will be the same in the appearance of a dictate that allies that would be avoided. Permutation to both links. It means there's both a definite U.S. change and request for NATO revision at the same time, which looks inflexible because our position's already decided, and it surprises allies because they don't get input before the U.S. acts. That's Sperling and Anderson. Any delay or re-explanation of the plan has not fixed his severance and voting issue for ground, including the plan ruins the process. A sequencing and independently sets U.S. policy first, running the NAC obsolete. Kun 18. Also, national states which will be these 5 states command structure intervene independently head of decision. However, use the political price running collective decision making the NAC obsolete. B fixed policy and it makes the proposal close to modification that Rex state was just agreed upon. Pause and inflexible position taking Lawrence 20 unilateral action of effect members over U.S. policy sound of contradicting Robert detriment of a commitment and response sufficient leaders not superior to reflection of drinking consultation by the end of the year based on the assumption that same modifies plans under influence of the allies pendants if even a consultation not leader change allies obtains time to agree this reduces tensions that could threaten cohesion. Permutation to the counterplan is severance of voting issue for ground. 1, the counterplan increases commitments and revises the treaty to change the obligation. The U.S. is always committed to the alliance standard. There's never a possibility of deviation. Coordination is a distinct strategy that increases obligations. French 18 alliance strategy between 2 types of distinct coordination distinguished by the commitment to consultation coordination features of future strong commitments and extensive consultation distinct features weak commitments little consultation commitment whereas U.S. obligation consultation refers to efforts to synchronize policy stable mechanisms vital to net ground. It sets the topic trajectory and if it's legit the proves the plan wasn't voting issue for ground. Literature should define competition counterplans educational and central to the topic. 2, it can never result in the plan if NATO agrees it becomes alliance policy. That's not its commitments a singular exclusive referring only to the U.S. for intended it's a part on its specific it means that agreement on any other. 3, it doesn't limit proposals are open to modifications they're not fixed definitely. Raker 3 Webster defining limited certain fixed a point indefinitely they must defend certainty conditional abstage ground. NATO NATO does not say no. One, empirics. The rules of the NAC are stacked in favor of the U.S., so proposals reliably get allies to toe the line. That's spurling to process consultation, mollify spheres, letting the U.S. control holdouts and reach deals even when allies are reluctant. That was above. Say no can't be comparative. If allies refuse the counterplan, they won't model the plan, and they will still continue operations within the NATO framework, just without the United States. That zeros case solvency, because all their evidence says NATO's key, not just the U.S. These arguments cut both ways. Their evidence doesn't apply. It says allies opposed in the abstract. The process is key. Political psychology proves collaboration shifts preference. Campbell's 20. This relies on psychologically rooted alliance ability to agree manifest cooperative behaviors, conflicts, and space marketing with allows for purging divergent perceptions and foster shared understanding. Allies call because they for community values. Only NATO consideration has begun. Reputational concerns over breakdown and added incentives in Sir Deal Cardis for implications of failing to overcome disagreement on procedures inside members to reach a solution. They're going to be less than a package to overcome deadlocks. Opposition will abstain, not veto. Moise of 8 procedural devices. Foster one silence procedure. Any government objection must inform informal opposition. Any seizure confrontation escape media coverage by not standing with in time. Government can avoid stating objection if it pleases allies. Other allies are said in Turkey, France, Germany, and Belgium rejected nevertheless initiative with passion changes and drop, leaving Belgium in isolation. Allies will say yes, they support restricting the scope of NATO. The obstacle is the U.S. position. Dollar 99. American vision NATO globally is not shared by allies for Europe, including Britain and France, whose interests extend the allies remains quintessential, whose purpose is security. Security in Europe, particularly in the Middle East, for perspective of long diverge, also true regarding proliferation. Neither perceive the threat. No regard NATO as an instrument for dealing. It's like the allies will agree to extend the reach beyond Europe. The allies should agree to limit NATO's reach, including that of use of force. France does not say no. Michelin 15. France's instruments of the champion defense approach institutions case by case, despite the U.S. intervention, bear bad memories. It's not to invoke Article 5 and trans French love hate story with the NATO for the foreseeable future. The next permutations are aimed to solve the internal benefit that we didn't read. Sorry, they also all include the plan, which links to the reasons permutation do both does. That was above the no spillover argument. It is not assumes the internal net benefit. We didn't read it, so it doesn't matter. The counterpoint does solve signal. U.S. advocacy makes our stance extremely clear. NATO will adopt it, and they're key because Article 5 operates by consensus. U.S. follow-on solves will be codified later as an effect. So the results identical to the plan. Marginal differences in clarity have no impact. The counterpoint is sufficient, even if the plan's slightly better. Signaling is offense. Unity is key. Symbol 17. Well, listen. Transcendental all of America, Europe are together. There were irresistible force from proxies, field coordinated defense strategies, chaos invited. Synchronization required bargaining. Atlanta, the strategic concept, which has a global signals. Apple is 10 as particle atoms reform. SE has essentially become real strategy. SE is the main document. U.S. active emphasize SE is more to be has to be more than words on paper, and it should actually affect operational strategy. SE could direct transformations, especially the outside world. SE can be opportunity to explain other powers might be confused. The U.S. sense of clear measurement ambitions attitude toward other players. Towards other players. I don't think they made a theory argument here. If they did, this counterplan is good. It's key to neg flex. It tests the word it's in the resolution, which is a necessary function. Anything else arbitrarily excludes the neg, and all theory arguments are justified by the fact that it's a new after the NDT. Hong Kong counterplan. Or actually, advantage counterplan, sorry. Kick plank 2, we're not going for it. Here's a new 2NC counterplan. The United States government should not engage in preventative war in Venezuela, financially induce Israel not to strike Hezbollah or any other Iranian proxy force, financially induce the TIAR not to engage in invasion of Venezuela, implement fiscal responsibility reforms. All the solvency arguments for this will be in the one in R. I'm just doing this because this speech is a constructive. 2NC counterplans are good. They're especially good against new apps. Neg needs maximum flexibility to account for the 2AC, to account for new 2AC spin out of the app that can't be predicted based off of the 1NC. All theory arguments are justified by the fact that it was a new app. Hong Kong counterplan. Not going for it. Permutation test of competition theories, reason to reject the argument of the team. MOU counterplan, permutation just test of competition. I'm not going for it. I'm not going for it. Theories, reason to reject the argument of the team. They play, but we will also concede that that rolling back U.S. policy is key. The plan does not roll back previous activation of Article 5, which means that they don't solve conditionality. It's good. One is neg flex. Testing the F against multiple angles is key. Is key. Anything else violates fairness and is bad for education. 2 is don't encourage cowardice. It's a new after the NDT that was said above. Concede reasonability from T. It proves no in-round abuse. Not going for it. I law advantage. I'm pretty sure the 2AC just conceded circumvention. Intervention is inevitable outside of Article 5. Even if the pack is eliminated, that does not stop defense as an individual discretion. It's entirely legal, irrespective of the alliance, and likely because of overwhelming pressure in a crisis. Other states know this, making the signal hollow. That's the Schmidt evidence. We will cite CIL or Article 51 of the UN, both supersede NATO. Schmidt 19 failure to invoke Article 5 and not bother the members from defending an individual self-defense or preclude other allies from coming to defense outside the NAT framework. Pursuant to Article 51 of the UN and CIL, UN obligations joint purpose over other treaties, including the NAT. No Iran impact. We did not drop it. Rhetoric. It's all red. We just said that their evidence is all rhetoric. Iran and Israel have been at war and saying they're going to strike one another for years without any action. So empirics is proven. Middle East defense below will also apply. No modeling. U.S. is perceived as a hypocrite. Strikes in the Middle East prove we violate international law consistently. Even under the Biden administration, it's part of the same war on terror. So it is in the context of the AF. And it is in the context of the AF. And if other countries don't see the U.S. as legitimate broadly, there's no reason why the plan does get modeled. Social science proves our arguments. And 13 taking exposed crack signaling theories, whether it's have such a social science demonstrate the cultural and cognitive bias that make communication difficult 2, humans find this to be any difference between states claims of signaling enough articulate with precision that can be false by people overestimate their ability to know others. Users correctly downplay the actions of adversaries when to be safer to assume that majority of signals are dismissed or remind counter foreign officials to fear to take U.S. government pronouncements seriously and assume that these are made to appease domestic audiences. The Bush Doctrine also proves the U.S. wouldn't get modeled. It's unilateral. It's not through NATO, and we still violated principles of self-defense when we responded to terrorism. No Middle East war, lower relevance of energy, increased political stability, muffled disputes all prove that's Carlin. No escalation. Glass 17 extra powers gaining a stranglehold is impossible. Regardless from economic problems that will hinder essential in the Middle East. China lacks will. And no sophisticated capabilities necessary to conquer neighboring territories. Again, controlling influence was bogged down by internal problems. The cost of offensive action repeatedly high military costs are exceedingly unlikely, even absent U.S. military presence. The operations advantage. They conceded NATO is strong now. They can't go for it. There's no offense for any of their link turns. Empirics prove even when activation was talked about in 2015 after French terrorist attacks, it did not fracture NATO to the extent that it destroyed the alliance. There's no uniqueness for anything. There's no terrorism impact, no motive. Terrorists have too many risky actions and avoid surveillance. Increase the risk of getting caught too much. That's Macintosh. No means. It takes states decades and billions. No terrorist has that. Wouldn't be given one because nuke detonations can be tracked. Can't steal one because nukes are the most protected assets, which means safe havens are irrelevant. NATO is not key. They dropped this also. Other attacks in places like the Philippines, Malaysia, and the Middle East, all are outside of NATO scope, even in the context of out-of-area operations, and are equally likely places where terrorism can happen. There's no bioterror. There's no motive for it. It's too hard. They don't have scientists even with technology. They can't recruit enough people. That was the 1NC evidence. Food is resilient because of technological innovation, even if they win their impact claim, because agriculture can easily bounce back before it escalates to war. There's no cyber impact, even if attacks are increasing now. Empirics go neg because they do not escalate. They do not reach use of force thresholds. The United States would have retaliated to attacks like Stuxnet and this SolarWinds attack if it was true that cyber terror escalated, and there's no motivation to actually go for an attack in the first place because they know it doesn't work and it doesn't cause casualties, which avoids political purpose of terrorism. Let me have water and then I'm good to go. Okay.
Are you good?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to start on the NAC counterplan on the say yes, say no debate. So in 2003 and 2006, Turkey invoked Article 5 in the NAC. France and Germany both vetoed in the NAC. Why does this not disprove all of your political psychology arguments that prove that consensus will occur within the
United States pushing it? It was Turkey, an ally that they already perceived to be not major.
No. In 2006, 2003, the U.S. said we should invoke Article 5 to Turkey, and yet France and Germany still vetoed. So how
did not activate it in a manner similar to the plan?
Well, the U.S. didn't activate it because other countries vetoed the activation.
The United States activated Article 5, and nobody vetoed it. Nobody even came close. Okay. Other people abstained.
But my question is more like that was different because that's when countries are activating Article 5 and they want to do something. But the AF is something that they don't want to do. So why would they veto that?
Wait, whoa. You said on the assurances DA and the 2AC that allies like the plan. You cannot take that back. Jordan was getting that cross section.
But in 2001, yes, they wanted to activate it. Maybe not anymore, but back then
that was a long time ago. I wasn't even born then.
Like, okay, fine.
That was a long time ago.
But I'll ask a different question.
Disagrees. We also read specific evidence.
The other thing is, your only specific say yes card about the F, the $99 card, was written before 9/11, before NATO. Said yes, NATO should go global. So how does this card even do anything?
If NATO dislikes the plan, you don't have a norms advantage, you don't have an operations advantage because other countries, will continue NATO operations post plan. Yes, you can go for this argument. It is not
fine. Other than just it might implicate the advantage. Do you still have solvency for the counterplan?
Yes, because the 2AC evidence was shit. It just says that there are NATO out-of-area operations that exist. You have not made a complete argument.
Well, I mean, your card is literally from
we read this Michelot card that also indicates that France.
Yes,
we read a Michelot card that indicates that France, one of the two countries that you have cited the entire debate, likes the plan, or likes the counterplan rather. This is proven by 2015 attacks in Belgium and in France, where there was discussion of activating Article 5, and they determined that no, we should not activate Article 5 in response to terrorism.
Your card literally doesn't assume the fact that they said yes to NATO going global.
We will read more evidence when you read evidence that actually says the argument you're trying to make.
On the law advantage, you were like circumvention because we will cite CIL or Article 51 of the UN. The plan literally has the US reference Article 51, a CIL, to say that we will do the F. So broadly. Why will they not, why will
because it references international law to limit the NATO treaty. It does not reference international law to prevent U.S. unilateral intervention in response to a terrorist attack, which is what happened in 2001 before we activated Article 5.
So your argument is that the U.S. sets a precedent that's we affirm Article 51, this precedent, and immediately after they do so, they're like, You know what? Never mind.
Yeah,
We're
we
gonna go
contradict
against this
ourselves
one.
all the time. Like
Why
that
doesn't
happens.
your
We
vote-
read
yeah,
we read
check
lots of
against that.
evidence
If
that says
the
the United States
if
contradicts
the
itself in
U.S. literally
international
makes
law.
a contradictory precedent, like, huh?
Yeah, that
Then
happens
we
all the
cannot-
time in international law. We said we would affirm Nicaragua, and then we didn't.
I'm just sending it.
We're gonna take a little bit of prep.
Oh, they're taking prep. Okay.
We stopped at 6:06.
Yeah. It should be sent. Yeah, it's sent. You change the mic. Yeah.
Here.
The order is going to be the infrastructure politics DA, the advantage counter plan, then the assurance DA. Is everybody good?
No, I still have to open the doc.
Michigan.
You said infrastructure advantage counterplan prolif?
Yeah.
Okay, one sec. Let me mute myself.
Cool. If everyone's good, it's like, cool. Infrastructure DA can see no impact, no offense, not going for it. Advantage counterplan. Counterplan solves the entirety of the app. Planks 1, the first plank of the counterplan, and also the plank of the counterplan that bans out of area operations. Definitely solves the entirety of the second advantage. Prohibits the United States from ever getting involved in any Article 5 operations over counterterrorism. Means that it results in the same functional thing of NATO, i.e., the US will never use Article 5 operations for counterterrorism. Results in better consensus throughout. Also, that solves or retains Article 5. The counterplan. The NATO does not specify the type response once Article 5 is voted. That can be narrative, diplomatic censure, or anything less of force. Economist 15. NATO says an armed attack should be on all members. But just Article 5 actually require Article 5 says response action could force it not mandated all NATO members to take such actions. That would be anything nuclear distant, response, and also the fact that also the counter fiats in forming a non-Article 5 counter-terror coalition with NATO member states, which operates outside the Article 5 framework. We'll never attempt to invoke it. There's no reason why we would. Also, all the new planks solve the entirety of the North advantage. They only have 2 impacts. One is Venezuela. One is invasion of Venezuela. The counter financially induces financially induces the TIAR to never invade Venezuela. Also financially induces Israel to never strike Hezbollah, and also fiats that the United States will not engage in preventative war. Venezuela solves all of it. Payments solve Kabir 19 when allies have divergent interest payments before alliance. The make your statement concessions, you're not having trade off. A devastating sense against can be voted, the issue linkages do, do some damage conflict to reach otherwise on the table, corporate parties agree when they have different values or your same payments are limited to level issue from a symmetrical alliance, and also links to the benefit. If they are right, if NATO doesn't like response over this issue, then it's zaps and the links to the benefit, especially since the kind of resolves any current concerns, maintain the current vital assurance, allies purposely agree to allow low total flexibility in the type of response coffin. Just the NATO's best answer to change flexibility, while the Article 5 dictates defense doesn't tell you what defense supposed to be, how it's best change when you support forces, what you stand to my be sure to use Article 5 be triggered what happens next to realize the question mark. Next is Article 51 links to benefit argument, not going for that plan because it doesn't matter. The Article 5 key argument kind of solves that because for the norms argument we solve it because we've added the impacts of the CT operations kind of solves since it doesn't use military force and current operations are outside Article 5 anyway. Fed isn't a 10 NATO without security already is a CT option, but I-7 24 force and rocket counterparts go in perm do both links to benefit because it still reduces the security equipment. That was the stuff above from the kind of money it's separate because it moves the entirety it moves to a one C voter for next flex and education because it makes debate impossible. And insurance is sad. Just outweighs magnitude, allied proliferation, NDT triggering cascades, and nuclear anarchy, and miscalculation, terrible will be blanketed, breaks out through access to miscalculation, stations, seriously 20, no theories great. All those would follow suit, artificial break the global nuclear rise of primary destruction, no, the apocalypse, or going to the usually shorts, and don't say capital proliferate, they said, a nightmare has been averted, through effort of America's survival, can rebel, use leads the way, it's faster, the reception of starting rearm causes frame to nuclear strikes by Russia, that's axing, get them on most stuff 16 to Germany has latent nuclear potential that could militarize in a few months, and independent NPT, allied proliferation causes nuke war through accidents and terrorism, McKenzie, 20 consequences of among allies or dying more, with nukes somewhat likely weapons get used, deliberate attack accidents or terrorism, or very cascade, point one against the nukes, those said to do the same. 2AC1 to group all the needs arguments that kind of generated and commits to the data process on Article 5, a vital issue that assures allies signals that we care about their input and data against the new trajectory of Trump since the kind of solves the aftermath that moves all of Biden incredibly resource commitments to NATO and linker cursors of minor Wayner 11 8 Biden as agreed with the relief by allies specifically resource of Harris COVID and Iran and NATO also will be rated yet a concern Republican control Canada duels use our release no go going back and will be refiguration no use go we're going to predictable fashion despite the ongoing differences allies will woken up from a nightmare and across by the NATO is sustainable stuff idea on case so 2AC2 the no link stuff Europe will read into unilateral reinterpretation of Article 5's disengagement classing assurances one misperception the context surrounding the plan is mistrust and fear. NATO will be watered down. They'll be closely watching for anything that could be spun into trail, even if only on specific issues. That's passive two cascades. The surprise nature of an abrupt shift outside the normal process causes allies to conclude their status has been downgraded. So they think further shifts are coming unless they're given all the formulation states that they understand. The plan bypasses the NDT process for its first meeting with Biden's inauguration. That makes renewed talk about use look hollow and guts. The European trust in the U.S. Royal 1230 European decision to security hinge on a number of factors. However, one issue stand up for risk and the U.S. be trusted to European into account. Will asking WWJD what Joe do Biden signal he will reassure also not to take his word. A word in the first round of the ACP after January 20th. And will lay the foundation for its reputation. Also pay very close attention to key areas that Europe said that in drain on attention. One shift to take place of the meaningful consultation to serve essential commitment and unilaterally adjusting U.S. alliance obligations based on fundamentally collective policy process in NATO will also 20 movement will be NATO with NATO members unilaterally interpreted alliance obligations discussions and policy private among NATO member states being effective during alliance phase. A country part of the process makes our prices critical. American commitment is enhanced. And 2AC3 plan popular is relevant. Let us get 18. Severe adjustments to the ally when the guarantees of making changes to doctrine announcements to benefit and testify. Ally comes to doubles guarantees that Asian proliferation cases support this and actions to provide info to the interest especially if this action could be favorable. A read appointment to the American district have say they recalibrate safety protection of support Spanish to think about effects that economic little tactical steps with shifting. I see the assessing symbols matter protections credit mad boy allies pay attention commitments to AC4 reinsurance is the link. They made some sort of back channeling argument they deck it by acting unilaterally to make us like a loose cannon capable of doing anything to watch in the future saying sorry after the fact is nothing because the trust has been evaporated. Consultations not normal means they cannot go for that rash 17 we are witnessing dramatic escalation in US foreign policy without consultation in Turkey allies 2AC5 the Turkey's number is wrong Moran 16 Atari's military aggressively targeting Curtis at level Rachel Russia data is an official and article license so for request made through back channels and license telegraphy no to Turkey we still Luxembourg NATO cannot pull into escalation with Russia as a result of reaching to Turkey NATO we're not on the table 2AC7 this is only no prolific stuff defense doesn't assume the link the shock of scaling back Article 5 creates huge political will that will come anywhere there as what the status quo not the plan the D is not just about Germany they dropped the one internally by UK and French vertical modernization is caused by withdrawal independently cracks the NPT because they're key stakeholders the stacks they have the capability of this will crack 9 countries have capability to acquire nukes quickly enough political with Germany and nations so public opinion rapidly shifts of 17 debate a greater robust information groups of nukes independence yet liberals and greens might be attractive fend off Russia for left leaning to determine independence for conservatives procedures for website and the word across 20 segments and to nuclear participation and ready to turn Turkey will prolific includes 19 or don't have responded by right building his own nukes and Turkish bombs disaster lead and arms systems that region and superimpose the cause makes 19 14 like similar rescue Armageddon France which shares nukes and charges 19 if Europe arrived at the US constitute reliable partner trying to exchange NATO with effectively realistic standards for France when a base in Arsenal in Germany or Portugal and Europe and bombers sharing they Iraq the NPT sour 20 European anti-French public legitimate weapons, so I said most cities under Europe, maybe not profitability of placing the U.S. and German with reinforced like perception. Now, the negotiations are willing to buy by the government, so what automatically introduces that maybe serious repercussions survival of MPT, and even without prolific Germany would withdraw that tube said actually skip that card. No, it causes war, it's destabilizing, miscalculation, confidence, irrational tensions, and hotspots. Syracuse 18 spread dangerous insecurity, the greater the number, the way of disaster or rotation comes with failed accidents or inherited adverse accidents is inherited regardless of coverage or compounds or regional intentions or progress of why it goes in another, and then maybe in any South Asian or Eastern Europe should not be far-fetched. What do I have fail once the cost is loose, that escalates our top 18 of prolific within adequate economic and authorized to limit launch more probable trigger of massive exchanges, sea-based missiles, and capable and unrestricted new states or unstable launcher, having the result of civil war, position, conscious of groups, terrorists getting access to position, focus spontaneous exchange by nuclear powers, hair trigger, Lord, crack the NPT, actually 18, even though Germany possesses the tech know how to admit necessary, we're not abandoned convinced unless something drastic happens, such as collapse of NATO. Market collapse of NATO.
606. 35 seconds. Ending the dock. Okay, order. ILA, operations, NAC, advantage counterplan, and assurance. Okay, everyone ready? I'll mute myself on Discord. No circumvention. The plan changes Article 5. It's able to create international legal regimes. It also cites Article 51 and customary international law. So those are not all causes. It is not hollow because the U.S. has a massive change to foreign policy initiatives. Counterterror unpopular was conceded on the policy facade, which means that the U.S. will renege. The rhetoric argument is disproven by history. Flip-flops equally apply to the disadvantage and the applicant to durable fiat. Yes, modeling. It solves the history of hypocrisy. The Kittrick evidence indicates changes to Article 5. Change Article 51 of the UN Treaty as well. The code evidence was dropped and indicates that the U.S. as a hegemon is able to create new norms of behavior. The random political science studies about signaling broadly that it should apply to the NAC counterplan, but not the case. It is not a random signaling. And the Bush Doctrine is proof that is U.S. models proven by Venezuela and Israel. Yes, Israel conflict. We have 2021 evidence that says that Israel is acting on security concerns. They believe that Hezbollah promotes an existential threat that draws in Iran, circumvents all of their defense. All of their evidence assumes China, Russia, and the United States. None of it assumes that Israel breaks a nuclear taboo, makes a nuclear war more likely. Yes, Venezuela envision. They believe it's an existential threat, and the only U.S. action can catalyze the operations advantage. I am kicking out that there's no impact to terrorism, but Article 5 still decimates credibility globally. The ALCO evidence indicates that it breaks the resolve capabilities, and that there is no consensus, so it creates Article 5 denials are inevitable. Thumbs to disadvantage because the U.S. or another country will deny Article 5 in the future. The Michelet evidence says that the NATOization of creating operations outside of NATO distracts from territorial defense, which causes Germany and France to proliferate in response because they don't believe that the U.S. and the rest of NATO is committed to it. Doesn't prove say yes on the counter plan because the plan gets rid of plan A, but they would be willing to accept plan B, but they would still prefer plan A in response. Their card doesn't apply to the rest of the advantages. The NAC counter plan is totally unworkable. First, they conceded proposed over alliance commitments. This acts as a reassurance counter plan because the U.S. can increase alliance commitments under Article 5 that have nothing to do with non-state actors, which resolves all the unilateralism deficits too. They conceded the United States says no, and the Johnson evidence, which means that the U.S. will not be able to catalyze support among NAC members. Europe also says no. Multiple members want expeditionary operations. Doesn't cut both ways because our international law advantage is based upon the citation, but proposing it to the NAC alone doesn't create the citation. Only U.S. changing practice does. Say no takes out the signaling offense because the U.S. proposal doesn't get modeling. The countries wouldn't abstain if they want the material constraints. Political psychology is largely irrelevant. They want a restriction, but not over terror. Yes, veto Pomerade. 21, they refused OAA into a non-Article 5 mission due to the migration. Italy, Spain, Greece, and Turkey maintain OAA under Article 5. They said danger of decrease in contribution to the mission was unacceptable. Article 5 was a immutable obligation. Seeing the opportunity collective information, Greece, Turkey, Spain, and Italy had a real interest in the mission. Article 5 became a guarantee for military control of the Mediterranean to migrations. The blurring of the international security was reinforced. Easy hard to qualify. There was pressure among capitals to harm over political top cover of collective defense. Turkey vetoes Colic 19. Turkey is a huge threat to the nation. escalation. PKK, the Turkey's under pressure according to Article 5, of which side NATO member state supports. European countries have doubt. States call into the question the doubts of the unity of the alliance to both solved, even if it's inflexible and causes delay. Allies will be reassured by the U.S. consultations in future. The Article 5 counterplan permutation to both solves because it has a bunch of posture changes that reassure allies that the counterplan doesn't cite international law, so it literally solves jack shit of the international law advantage. It links the net benefit. Their Woolforth evidence is about unilateral changes to responses to Article 5. The Lanaska card is about troops and doctrinal changes, not about Article 5, which means that it links just as much to perceptions of unilateralism. It also does not solve U.S. capabilities. It doesn't solve the Venezuela scenario because it's viewed as an existential threat. No amount of money is enough, especially because they believe terrorists will attack them in the meantime, which is the reason that they will pressure the U.S. for intervention, even absent intervention, that causes a Caribbean crisis of WMD, which when dropped by the QNC again. You also can't pay Israel enough. There is new doctrinal changes that indicate that they're going to attack in the meantime, and taking U.S. force off the table doesn't create the same modeling as taking Article 5 off the table because it doesn't apply to Article 51 of the UN, which our evidence indicates is largely interchangeable. It also links to the net benefit. Taylor, citing Beckley 15 figure, comes from Beckley defined defense packs. Deals with defense as a large amount of the U.S. To protect the counterpoint. They read a bunch of new scenarios, so we get the new impact defense later. The commitment will collapse. It's not about our link turns are not about U.S. commitment, but rather about NATO going out of area operations. There are just spoiler states that will veto actual operations in the future. EU fills in was largely unanswered by the one the Perot evidence indicates that they will have new counter-terror operations that could assure allies and also remedies unilateralism. That's Novosti 17. EU unanimously expressed support to the France invocation, enable France to have the necessary support it needed to sign of the EU's desire to step on NATO. Article did not commit the U.S. to anything. It was easy to support invocation to the attaching Eastern European. Explain Article 42, enhanced security, place one's eggs in multiple baskets. Countries look to the EU. If NATO's Article 5 loses credibility, would be a game changer. With Solidarity Day drops that in 2007 we denied Article 5 to Estonia, and in 2003 that we denied it to Turkey. They read evidence about the 2016 invocation, not about those. The sanctity argument is largely wrong. That's Fedstein 10. In the Go for NATO, consider Article 5 German objected to incident shook. Article 5 NATO offered assistance to Turkey support rebuffed by Germany, France, Estonia cyber attacks victims to appeal to help NATO, such as the faint-hearted members question the credibility of security guarantee. Don't believe supported. Also, there is no solving security guarantees. It's largely incredible now, and they don't follow the U.S. lead. There's no that's the Snyder evidence, no Cascade, Kulaki 21, Little Chantini, Umbrella State to quit the NPT in response to U.S. policy. Expert concluded the new Irish was not favorable. Allies still feel bureaucrats lose their jobs. Not acceptable anti-nuclear norms, a strong NPT and appeasement of the U.S. jittery bureaucrats that keeps the states from building nukes, TPNW disarmed. They don't solve Green 18 according to large massive literature.
Okay, let me get set up. There is one card. Jordan's gonna send it.
I already sent it.
He already sent it.
The order, the NAC counterplan, the advantage counterplan, the prolift DA, the international law advantage. Anybody need anything repeated? Okay, can I have a thumbs up from everyone? You're good? Wonderful. Proposing the plan's modification to the NAC solves every single impact of the 1AC. They have dropped all of our evidence about political psychology and the function of NATO, which guarantees that the deck is stacked in the United States' favor and overcomes any evidence that says that some allies have some reservations about ending Article 5 coverage of non-state actors because of the sheer magnitude of the largest NATO member state and the one that contributes the most to terrorism operations, saying that we should do the plan. That signal comparatively overcomes any of their say no arguments. For the first permutation does not apply. It does not solve. It cannot reassure. They've conceded our reassurances fails arguments from the DA. They cannot fail. It's an apology after unilaterally deciding that we will destroy Article 5 in the United States' own interest. They've conceded all of our arguments about the NAC supremacy being key to shielding the DA because it needs to come before other policies. So reassurances themselves overwhelm the signal of the counterplan and make it seem like the United States is committed to unilateralism and then apologizing afterwards, which is the link argument and the 1 and R. The U.S. cannot say no. Fiat solves it. We propose it to the NAC. We can't reject our own proposal. That's not how it works. They don't have evidence for this argument. The United States does not say no. They don't want to get involved in terrorism. They've conceded the Becker evidence, which says every country follows on. We'll have to modify our own defense plan to be able to codify the counterplan into United States law, which solves norms independently, even if allies say no, because it means the United States still spills over internationally and sends the signal that it is committed to the plan. This is a argument that is not answered. This is the Becker 20 evidence. It is dropped by the 1AR and means that even if they win, allies veto the plan, the United States still codifies it in U.S. law. And since they've only gone for the modeling advantage, that still spills over because it gets codified and the United States follows on to its NAC proposal. The EU does not want operations. They have conceded on the advantage counterplan that operations exist outside of Article 5. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they want them because the counterplan does not take those away. And so they have, which takes away all of their incentive that allies have to say no. Their evidence is not comparative. All of the arguments above about why the United States advocating it solves, approves consensus-based decision-making does solve, it mutes backlash. The United States can explain the rationale for the counterplan to allies within the process of consultation rather than unilateral revocation in the world of the plan, which mutes backlash that they have. They've conceded allies will not veto. They would rather abstain to avoid the political costs of defying the largest member of NATO and the one that guarantees all of their security because they have security incentives and political incentives to do so. That's our evidence from 2008 that I don't remember the name of. Remember that none of their solvency deficits are comparative. If allies dislike the plan, they'll continue expansive interpretations of Article 51. Those, if the entire European Union does that, then those also get modeled by other countries more so than the plan because countries are fundamentally self-interested and will model norms that they like. The vetoing evidence does not rise to the level of our counterplan evidence and our say yes evidence about the bargaining process of NATO. They have said that NATO allies maybe dislike the plan. First, we conceded their evidence in the 2AC that says that the substance of the plan is popular. We only went for links about process, so they can't contradict themselves. But their evidence does not rise to the levels of saying veto. It says that it's hard. The counterplan makes it such that the conclusion of that is that allies say yes. That's the Anderson evidence. Turkey does not solve. They've conceded that Turkey dislikes the plan. This means that we have a link to the pro-lift DA, but the process of the counterplan overcomes it. Our evidence even cites Turkey as an example of somebody who abstains from NAC decisions that they don't like for those political costs. Well, only we have evidence about the counterplan counterplan. You should read it after the round. Permutation do both links to the net benefit. It sets the NAC policy. It sets NAC policy as supreme over assurances, which decks them, and it unilaterally revokes Article 5 beforehand, which destroys assurances. At worst, they've conceded conditionality. You should judge kick the counterplan. If we lose it, then the DA will outweigh independently the assurances DA. Or sorry, article advantage counterplan permutation as a competition, not going for it. Assurances DA. Proliferation outweighs the cause extinction. Destroying the NPT destroys the nuclear taboo, makes countries prone to miscalculation because of insecure nuclear arsenals. They've conceded our loose nukes and our terrorism impacts, which also both go nuclear due to retaliation, and turns the case because it guarantees preemptive strikes and undermines the absolute international norm. The counterpoint solves their first uniqueness argument. It coheres NATO and overcomes it through consensus-based decision-making in the United States' role. The plan does not solve NATO collapse because it does not cohere them around any one response. They don't have an argument about that. New counterterror does not reassure NATO broadly. It may reassure them over terrorism, but their fundamental security benefactor, the United States, has just revoked Article 5 and made it not as relevant as it used to be, which causes uncertainty over the nuclear umbrella. It raises threat perceptions of other countries as they don't believe the United States will follow through on future commitments in other areas such as Russia. That prompts German and French proliferation, modernization, and British, which cracks the NPT independent of yes or no prolif. That does not solve the unilateral perception of the AF, unilateralism cascades for all these uncertainty arguments that I talked about above. So, it's not empirically disproven. That didn't decrease the United States' alliance commitment because it was committed to the NAC. They've conceded brink evidence that says that only using the NAC and consensus-based decision-making can overcome the perception of unilateralism, and that now is key because it's going to be Biden's first time meeting with the council. I think there is uniqueness to Lenoska 19, but enemy fear is natural, but to induce nuclear acquisition, something fundamental has to change. Destroy confidence guarantees our allies are adequate and remain so for destroying prolif intensify with Trump, not to an extent that prolif appears likely. Allies does not rely on rhetoric of the White House to gauge the strength of guarantees, but rhetoric becomes reality. States get too alarmed to seriously consider the nuclear option. They have conceded the Turkish prolif impact and said Turkey dislikes the plan. This outweighs the case. It comes first. It causes preemption, which turns the case, especially in the Middle East. And especially in the Middle East, Turkey proliferates and goes nuclear, cause extinction due to general tensions in the region. Yes, there are cascades. They've read about half of this card, and it's about the strength of the NPT because of U.S. security guarantees, which the plan necessarily revokes. And destroying the NPT solves. Their evidence says there's a reason that there's no cascade is because it cascades. They've also conceded that Germany and France will modernize, which destroys the NPT independent of proliferation. Say no on the counterplan proves the link to the DA, but the process of the counterplan overcomes say no.
We have 35 seconds.
Before you start, my internet cut out for like 40 seconds of the 2NR. Does like anybody know the way to access the recording or like something else I should do?
It's live on YouTube. If you go to the stream and like go back a little bit, I can put the link to that in chat if you want.
Yeah, I see the link.
Email tab. I think you can email tab.
I'll try the stream right after the debate, but for now, the 2AR can start.
Okay, thanks.
Before I start, can I just get some water, but I'll be back. Okay. The order is ILA, NAC assurance. Okay. Is anyone not ready?
Sorry, so you said ILA NAC assurance?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm good.
Everyone else good? Okay, cool. It is far die out. They have considered the only advantage that has a straight turn to the DA and any risk of insolvency steps that makes an auto ad felon. They have dropped that an Israeli strike on Hezbollah is coming now that will join Iran. The rest of the Middle East turn the entire world into a nuclear hellscape and ensure that extinction will happen. The same thing will happen in Venezuela as the US and Russia will go into a competitive great power war over a US invasion of a region that will literally cause the impact to the DA. You should ask yourself, what is the effect of global proliferation if it is not wars in the Middle East, Latin America, wars between great powers such as the US and Russia, which means these wars are all imminent, all short term, and will occur in the short term. All of this insecurity means that proliferation is likely inevitable because countries will be scared of a more insecure environment in places like the Middle East, which means cascades are totally inevitable. And any chance of insolvency steps on the counterplan means you have to vote affirmative. Now on the NDT counterplan, the 2NR is really fuck this. They have dropped the one error evidence that is actually extremely specific, name specific countries, and is about Article 5 and says that countries believe that it is an existential threat to not veto counter to continue counter-terror missions under Article 5 in the Mediterranean. It specifically cites countries such as Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Spain. It says they think that Article 5 missions such as the OAE are critical to their security, which is that the chance that they say no to the NAC is extremely high. You should read the Pomeranz card after the round. It is likely better than every single next say yes card because it assumes countries' intentions and says that no circumstance will these countries ever allow the OAE mission to go underground. The empirics also void any chance of the counterplan studies proving say yes. They have dropped the Feddersen evidence that was read in the 1AR. It was explicitly flagged and referenced in every cross-sex amendment that says that when the countries proposed a change to alliance policy to the NAC in 2002, 2003, and 2006, and 2007, when countries chose whether or not they should invoke Article 5 for Turkey, countries such as France, Germany have spoiled the process and ensured that the process broke down. You should keep in mind that this was despite the fact that the US came out and said that they supported Turkish invocation of Article 5, which means that US pressure was not sufficient in that instance, and there's no reason why US pressure will be sufficient now. That proves empirics prove that NAC does not create consensus. US pressure is not enough, and we have an excellent say no card to avoid all of their offense. Now, the first argument is political psychology. One, you should remember that the US just proposes the proposition to the NAC, but they cannot fiat that the US will decide to pressure allies. If the US does pressure allies, then it likely links harder to the net benefit because it is a unilateral change in the US's posture that is not a genuine consultation. But second is that all of their arguments are just entirely theoretical or evidence-based. That in empirics in 2006, 2003, when the NAC actually chose whether or not to invoke Article 5, vetoes were present. For instance, Germany were spoilers, which means that in this instance, countries would not just abstain, but will likely say no. They say the US will follow on with their own proposal. This is complete bullshit. The 1AR did not drop this. We have said specifically that because the US will follow on, but without citing international law, as not citing international law within their own proposal, it will likely not spill over in order to ensure that there is a moderate change in alliance policy. Also, if the US is the only one that is able to codify it within their own proposal, then it means that Article 5 framework still exists within NATO and means that other NATO members will likely still violate the UN Charter, which was a dropped argument. This argument is nonsense. I don't want to hear an RFC about it. They say the counterplan will take away the missions. The counterplan does not take away missions. Our evidence is hyper-specific and says that OAE is an Article 5 mission, which means that if the NAC does say yes to the affirmative, then it will require voiding an Article 5 mission like the OAE, which means that they will say no. Allies will not abstain because of the empirics argument that I said above, and their argument about how their argument about how Turkey has abstained in the past is nonsense. You should read their evidence. It specifically says that it doesn't say that Turkey abstains. It says that the issue was over Turkey and some other countries abstained, which is that this is not sufficient. They say the substance of the app is popular. Yes, the substance of the app was popular for me, France, and a couple of other countries, but we're reading hyper-specific evidence that says that Turkey, Italy, and Greece will oppose this proposal, which means that this is all bullshit. Now the assurance is that at the top there's the risk of terrorism and strikes are extremely low. Now, if anything, the case access is faster because it says that ENL and Hezbollah strikes are coming right now against Israel as well as most Latin American countries, which means that a global nuclear war involving terrorists are a short-term possibility. That the affirmative is try or die in order to stop their consensus norming principles cannot solve the affirmative. We're not going for consensus code, but rather
a change in international law good, which the DA obviously cannot do. Now, on the link debate, the link is quite literally zero. The quality of evidence is vastly superior and ensures that countries do not proliferate. One, the EU will fill in instead of countries proliferating. The Novotsky card in the 1AR is excellent. It says the word Article 5. It says that in a world where Article 5 loses its credibility, countries would turn to the EU instead of developing nuclear weapons. They have dropped all the 1AC cards to say the EU is more comparatively effective against counter-terror as well as with non-military missions, which is that countries would likely be satisfied with that and not develop their own nuclear weapons. Gut check. You should ask yourself, why would countries choose to develop nuclear weapons against non-nuclear adversaries such as terrorists? It just doesn't make sense. This outweighs their links because none of their cards are actually about Article 5. It is about general changes in alliance policy and does not assume that, but our evidence does assume a contingency plan in which Article 5 changes and says Plan B is the EU, not automatically nuclear weapons. Second, it said they have dropped that denials to activation are inevitable. In the past, Turkey has been denied activation in 2003 and Estonia in 2007, which means that proliferation should have already occurred. And the fact that prolif did not occur probably means that there is a Plan B and countries will not proliferate. They say uncertainty will cause proliferation. No, the Novotsky evidence specifically references uncertainty in Article 5 and says the countries would turn to the EU instead. Now, you should filter all of their link cards through one major question. You should ask yourself, do any of these cards actually say that countries will proliferate? It just says that allies get insecure or hedged, but does not say that proliferation would occur unless there's a card that says that you cannot vote on this DA. The only card that does say it is Lenuska, which is about troops and not about changes in alliance policy and does not assume the mechanism of the affirmative. The Wolster evidence is also about changes in alliance policy, not about Article 5, and does not say that proliferation would occur. This all means the chance of proliferation is extremely low. The link is zero, and any risk of a deficit straight turns to DA.
Good debate.
Good debate.
Ned card doc is sent.
Half card docs incoming.
I believe we are in. Is everybody here?
I think Brandon's coming.
Oh, okay, yeah. Cool. All right. Congratulations to both of you, all of y'all, from reaching the elimination rounds of the NDT. The decision is 4-1 for the affirmative.
Hi, Sat. I'll keep it quick. Just first, congratulations to Kentucky on a great NDT. I've enjoyed judging you all this year. I thought that the risk of the disad was pretty big. And while there was a risk of a solvency deficit, the counterplan seriously complicated the try or die narrative that was coming out of the 2AR. And the say no arguments that gave you a solvency deficit demonstrated the propensity for a link to the disad. So when I was comparing the risks presented by voting for each one, I had to consider what was going on to cause those solvency deficits. So I thought that the counter plan was the best chance I had of resolving the terminal impact that you went for. I thought that the evidence that you were going for like other countries' veto did rely on the logic that they were like terrified of the change on its own, but it didn't quite get to the level of saying they definitively would veto a US proposal to make the change. It said they had interests at stake, that they liked the current missions. So if you're right that those are really important, unrecoverable security things, that demonstrates the propensity for prolif to happen. And I think that your spin of what the neg prolif link evidence says just wasn't quite right. I think they did have a lot of evidence saying that unilateral doctrinal revisions were directly connected to decisions about proliferation. I also don't know that that argument necessarily responded to their Turkish proliferation scenario, which definitively turned the case and had external impacts. While you might be right that the counterplan doesn't always result in the AF, they do have mechanisms to try and overcome some of those objections. So even with that said, the counterplan has a chance to solve, whereas I don't think the AF gets a whole lot of defense to the disad. I thought that the counterplan definitely did try. They had a lot of evidence to suggest that the United States would be able to overcome some of those objections, even if they exist. Their Becker evidence says that states go along even if they resist the initial change. They had this argument, which is based on the Cardas evidence, which says that other countries think that agreeing is important to maintain their security commitment from the United States. So I think that there is enough reason for states to drop their objections. They have evidence that this has occurred in the past, that the United States would be able to get agreement, even in those worlds where I think countries are inclined to say no. So I think the best possibility to actually resolve the big Middle East war comes from voting negative.
I can go first. I thought this was a close debate. I was the last one in. I think that I definitely agree that the counterplan is a try. I don't think it's like a just automatically try or die for the AF. And I actually think the debating on the counterplan is quite good by the negative, and I think definitely is winning. I think the explanation debate on how the process of the counterplan can smooth over a lot of the difficulties with these states' objections. I'm not completely convinced. I still don't think it's a slam dunk for the negative. The affirmative evidence is pretty compelling that there are some pretty big doubts about from countries like Turkey about how agreeing to this. And I think that maybe like the 2AC evidence on assurance that you're kind of using to, trying to co-opt to prove that they'd smooth over. I'm not sure that your evidence, I don't know. I'm not sure that raises to the level of they'd actually be willing to make this, the NEC would actually be willing to make this change. And I feel like the AF evidence is actually pretty good that these kind of disagreements are big strains in the alliance. Like these are like big debates. I don't think it's something that would automatically would just be smoothed over and would mean that they would just abstain. I do think the affirmative evidence is more specific here. I also think while it is not try or die, a big portion of this, because I actually don't think the Solvency deficit is like huge. I just think that it's not worth risking, because I think give the affirmative a little bit more credit on the defense to the assurance disad. I think that first of all, it would definitely be helpful if there was some more comparison on like time frame. I think the evidence from 2021 that says that these strikes are high on the national agenda in Israel maybe it kind of matches to our explanation of time frame. I think it'd be helpful to mention how quickly proliferation would happen. Just do a little bit more comparison would be helpful. But also, I think that the AF evidence that I don't remember piece of evidence. I think it's a piece of 1AR evidence that just says that like umbrella states it wouldn't really make sense for them to proliferate. I think also like this argument is more persuasive to me in this context because I think the AF is kind of giving a clue about what they would do instead. I think the EU fill-in argument is quite compelling to me because it seems like an issue-specific way for if countries are not secure in the ability of NATO to handle terror operations, where they would go. It kind of indicates that's exactly what's happening. I think that would be the likely outcome. I think that there needs to be a little bit more ink on this and a little more explanation to answer this by the negative, because it not only is it just kind of logical. I think it's it's definitely saying what is happening now, and I think that this kind of combined with the norms against proliferation that some of the evidence talks about, and just evidence that cites that countries aren't really likely to do it, means I'm a lot more worried about these Israel strikes impact. It's going to happen really quickly, and I think also agreed that would also likely cause proliferation too. So I think that while the counterplan probably might solve the affirmative, it's just like the risk of it not solving is so big that I think it's not worth it to risk not doing the affirmative.
I can go next. So I thought on the counterplan that there was a pretty decent chance that there was going to be some states within NATO that don't want to restrict Article 5 for terrorist attacks. I think the evidence that you concede the AFS is right, that it's not representative of the countries, at least in the East Mediterranean, that they've talked about that are particularly worried about this issue. And their evidence is from 21 and says that the last time that NATO tried to take an Article 5 mission off the table, which is Active Endeavor, there was a huge amount of resistance to it. And so these states would likely go against this policy. Now, the negative obviously has a lot of second level responses to this premise that they could just veto it. So I'll go through some of the ones that I thought were relatively important. Number one is this follow-on business. There's the negative makes a claim that in the event that the process of the counterplan fails, that the U.S. would just do the thing, and then over time the norm just establishes. I don't agree with this. I think that there's not a conclusive card that says in the event that the NAC process fails, the U.S. will comply by its original proposal. There's no card that says that. The counterplan text says propose it to the NAC. I don't understand this argument as clearly made earlier in the debate, and I think the 2AR is right that just because we propose it to the NAC, and if the proposal fails, there's no reason why the U.S. would comply with it after. Second, your Becker evidence, I don't think rises to the level of saying that a vetoed process is equivalent, will make states comply. It's about like an official alliance planning thing that happened, and then states were kind of like hesitant. It's about burden sharing, and then says that they will occasionally comply. So it's like definitely not definitive, and I think that the 1+2 means that the follow-on stuff doesn't make as much sense. There's a couple of other ticky-tack things like I didn't write all of it down, but there was like, like the states will just like abstain. I think your evidence is about like states like it's about Turkey security concerns and like 3 other countries caring about it and them like abstaining in the vote because they like somewhat disagree with the proposal. I don't think it rises to the level of like, a direct security interest like they're talking about. The thing that I kind of thought about a little bit was like where the neg was like every degree of solvency deficit they win is just a proportional link to the assurance DA, because the more they say no to the counterplan, the more likely it links to the assurance DA. I think that this is incorrect for a couple of reasons. And so basically, like, I assume that the premise of that was like, you basically just have to weigh the assurance DA and you have to win more assurance DA, we just win. I don't agree with that premise. I think that there is a different threshold for prolif and a state vetoing proposal in NAC. This, I think, is one kind of intuitive. They kind of clearly say that, like, look, states want A5 to be applied, but the alternative to A5 would not be to get the bomb. It doesn't make sense. It's not useful to deter non-state attacks. So the intuitive process obviously to shift somewhere else. Does this impact consultation links? Probably not. I'll talk about that a little bit. First, there's like kind of just like a general empirics disprove thing, which I guess was also about the specific link, which is about past thresholds of activation didn't like happen, Paris, other cases, which proves that like people in NATO think that it may not always be invoked. They just don't want to rule it out off the table, because I don't think it's something that's necessary for the security guarantee. And I thought the main thing that kind of convinced me on this like consultation thing was just like the threshold for getting the bomb because of a lack of consultation. It's like gotta be pretty high. Like I agree you have LinkEv that defines the direction that's like states don't like you when they're not consulted. The best card that ties to prolif is Lanaska. And Lanaska, like the AF's right that like that article and the portions of like all the underlying part of that card is about large like troop changes, and like it goes to like West Germany, South Korea, like the history of US military policy in those regions. And it's like these large changes when unconsulted, and like it's so difficult to explain to the AF why the lack of consultation is the thing that's going to trigger. Like they're just going to like get the bomb because they don't doubt nuclear security guarantees now. It's difficult. Plus, in combination with like the U.S. reassuring being like this obviously has nothing to do with protecting the like defense of your state, so on and so forth. It's just difficult to conceive of a way that you can think prolif can be super large. Plus, the solvency deficit to the counterplan, I think, makes it kind of difficult. I think that's basically the high level of what I thought. If I missed anything, or like I may have not written everything down, just like feel free to ask questions. But I think you all have had a great tournament. Congratulations on a very successful year. I look forward to judging you all again, hopefully next year.
Yeah, I can go. I thought the debating was excellent. Everyone did a great job, and I really enjoyed it. It was one of the better debates I've judged at the NDT. I agreed with a lot of what was said. A couple of things that were particularly important for me. One is that I think that the AF wins a large proportion of say no. Specifically, I think that they win that some combination or all of Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Spain would say no. These like Eastern Mediterranean countries that were just being talked about. There's a mismatch between a lot of like your evidence, like the best evidence that you read, which is mostly about France and Germany, and the cards that they read, which are about these countries. The one AR card in particular, the like Pomerade card, is excellent. It's from 2021, and it specifically isolates these countries, ties it to Article 5. It's just way more specific. I think your debating is quite good, but a lot of your appeals to like the psychology and those empirics are like just too generic in the context of this particular proposal. And Tasia kind of went through, talked about each of those, so I don't want to like regurgitate, but what I will say is I then considered like whether or not they would just abstain and what that would mean. But I think that that card is about countries that are neutral to the proposal and like, but like they kind of oppose it, but they're not a party directly involved. So it gives the example of whether we would veto like sales of weapons to Turkey and like a couple European countries whose media would not be happy with that, would just abstain instead of like voting for or against it. And so it didn't make a ton of sense how I should like interact, how those things would intersect. And I also agree with the characterization of like the follow on the Beckley card, I believe the site was, or Becker actually, I think it was. The other problem I had with this that sort of factored in was you made the like the AF was kind of forwarding this argument. They framed it as like, if the counterplan doesn't cite international law, it doesn't solve anyways because it doesn't send the same signal. But you at least say generically in the counterplan text that that you do follow ILOB. So the third level question I get to after going through the same thought process that was decided about the thresholds for proliferation, whether or not this would apply, whether the US would even follow through with something that was vetoed, is like, even if it did, I like think this would probably link to the assurance DA, because now we're like citing the same ILAW thing unilaterally. And that was like, that was both underdeveloped 2NR like out, and also like struck pretty clearly answered by the 1AR and the 2AR. So I think that there's a pretty big solvency deficit of say no. And I think also that the DA is pretty low. I similarly thought the turn to the EU arguments were a little bit mishandled by the 2NR, which was excellent on like like the comparative impact framing about proliferation happening, what that would look like, but less good about like establishing clear thresholds tied to either consultation versus like just limiting this one particular thing, or just like proliferation in general. And so I think like some of those countries will turn to the EU, if not all of them, or just like they wouldn't reach the level of proliferation. I did think a little bit about whether this would apply to Turkey, which seemed like maybe the outlier. And I thought that there was not a lot of defense on Turkey specifically. But the problems with that were twofold. One was that like no one had definitive evidence. Like you didn't have evidence that I could even like kind of apply for you because of like newness of arguments or something. And that was like Turkey would reject this. And so you both reading cards that are like sort of open-ended either way. So I don't really know what to make of what Turkey would do, but also just like I read your card and it was like pretty clearly about kicking Turkey out. And so it's like not really clear that the same threshold would be used, that Turkey would care about those things and whatever. So I think there's like a heavy bit of internal link defense. And then it's like, even if I give you like a lot of weight of Turkey from there, they like the advantage is just much bigger.
Yeah, I agree with basically all of that. I think the AF is just definitively winning that there are some countries that would say no to the counterplan. I don't really like want to echo what all the other judges have said, but like this like piece of evidence is from the 1NR from like 21, like the like something like Palmer evidence. It's a lot more recent, and I think like almost all of the other evidence that's being read in the debate about like whether or not like NATO countries like want Article 5 to be applied to like counterterrorism is just like mostly irrelevant, when I think there's a card from like a couple of months ago that says that like there is an active ongoing like counterterror operation in the Eastern Mediterranean that is being justified with Article 5. So I think once the AF wins that, it seems to me like there's just a very, very good chance that this like proposal, like the counterplan's proposal, is never adopted by the NAC, which means that the risk of a solvency deficit is just pretty big. I did think a lot about this like Becker 20 card, because it says that like it would be codified in US law. But I agree with like what Tasha said, that I think this card just does not really come close to saying that like, you know, US proposals in the NAC that fail would eventually become a part of domestic US law. And there's just nothing in the counterplan text that like suggests that that would be the case. So I don't really think there's any world in which the US like would end up citing ILAW in a world where some countries in the NAC have objections. I agree that the risk of like, you have a lot of stuff going on that says that like the US is able to like pressure other countries in the NAC to adopting their proposal. And I think like the risk of a solvency deficit isn't like absolute because of those arguments, but it just seems pretty sizable when I think this piece of evidence in the 1AR is so good at establishing that like other members of NATO just would have seriously strong objections to the counterplan, because they really care about that ongoing counterterror mission. I guess another thing that hasn't been mentioned is that I did find like the 2AR's argument that like if the US were pressuring countries within the NAC to do the plan, then like there would be a link to the pro-FDA that's like sort of similar to the link that the plan has. Like I agree that all of your evidence is like good that says that like doing it through the process of the NAC like blunts some of the impact that like a unilateral revision would have. But it seems to me like there's a decent chance that like after the counterplan is proposed, there's a decent chance that the US like pressures other countries to do the plan, and then those other countries have objections, say no to it, and it doesn't end up happening, but the US has already like pushed for something that's functionally equivalent to the plan, just done through the NAC. And to me, that seems like it's the worst of both worlds, because the US is like pressuring other countries to do it. It doesn't end up happening. It doesn't end up citing US ILAW, so it doesn't solve any of the case, but like the risk of the pro-FDA is sizable. Past that, I agree with basically everything else that's been said on the pro-FDA. I found it like difficult to understand how just like not applying Article 5 in the area of like counterterrorism against non-state actors would result in proliferation. So I don't want to just like repeat what's been said there. I think a 2&R that gets to the case and just like extends some of the stuff that just says like just some defense to the advantage. It just says that like the US will like inevitably cite other things beyond just like NATO's Article 5 to continue to just like justify these like preventative wars against like Hezbollah or Venezuela. I think if the 2&R gets there, that would have possibly been enough to win a neg ballot, because I do think the risk of the pro-FDA is like sizable, and like the solvency deficit is like not 100%. It's just tough because the impact of the solvency deficit is so big that I think that once they're winning a big risk of it, it was tough for me to vote AF, even if I think the risk of the DA is like sizable. Yeah.
All right. I just have one quick question for the four. Or I guess Tom, you too. Just like a 2&R that goes for the SQUO in the form of the DA and then goes like pretty hard for these circumvention arguments. Do you think that like that possibly changes where we are on the DA if like more time is spent there, and then maybe cases like is the circumvention argument compelling enough for that 2&R to outweigh like a big try or die push, do you think?
I think you also should keep, at least for me, the like don't invade Venezuela like planks of the advantage counter plan. There's no reason not to. I think like kind of, especially with new apps, like teams really love to slow roll their like 1AR tricks. And when they read this Pomerade card, like I think it's just too good. Like given everything else that happened, I think you should have kicked Knack and done the advantage counter plan in DA in case.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you all did know from 1AC Crossix on that there are non-Article 5 counterterror missions, which is true. And like I didn't say this in the decision like initially but like Operation Active Endeavor is done. Like it finished in 2016. It's replaced by a non-A5 mission now. It seemed like you all like knew some of that. I thought you would catch on. Like if you just like Google it, it's like it's done. Like it finished in 2016. They were supposed to be a non-A5 mission. Their card is about the history after 9/11. And so I assumed you all would cut the F about it. I think the F should just fiat to get rid of non-A5 CT as well, because you can say it's like an alliance commitment maybe, and then you can still use the solvency deficit to the counter plan. But I thought you all would figure that out. To be quite honest, and I think like once they read this card, you have to know like the NIC counter plan. You basically like if they have like a card that's this specific, it's like it's gonna be extremely tough. It's like either like Jordan like should like look for a card that answers this or something before the 2&R, or you should like prepare to go for the DA in the case. And I think you can maybe use, or you could alternatively concede maybe some of the say no arguments like, look, Turkey's like literally doing CT in East Med now. We had a Turkey prolif scenario. It's distinguished from all of their external thumpers because it's about like France and other countries that are like using CT and stuff. And I think that maybe would have been better because like a lot of like they obviously don't have I don't think they have like a Turkey specific non-invocation example. Maybe they do, but yeah.
I personally thought the circumvention arguments were extremely strong. I don't know a ton about like what it means to be an Article 5 or not Article 5 counterterror mission in NATO, but I do know a bit about international law. And there are a lot of different justifications that the United States gives for its counterterror missions, and particularly preventive self-defense. I thought you had like the CIL warrant in the middle of the debate. I don't know what the F response to that argument was. So that would be going for solvency-based defense against the advantage. So you would still need to preempt try or die somehow in 2&R. Maybe that's advantage counter plan. Maybe that's extension of impact defense, something. But if you pair that with any like try or die nonsense thing, then I think you have a very good angle against advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I think circumvention was okay. I don't think the two cards you have that are about NATO, I don't think are particularly useful, because if they say the US changes its interpretation of what self-defense is, then like your one card is like they will use self-defense outside of the NATO process, which the counterplan changes, like the plan changes the definition of for the US. And then the other cards, like they'll like maybe if I read it generously to be like they'll use other CIL outside of the defense pact, then I could be convinced. The better cards are just like they'll use other things like R2P, other international norms of justified intervention that are outside of self-defense. And like there are plenty of cards that say that. I'm sure you have ILOC cards that say that. But like if those were, that would have been more useful. It's just tough against apps like this by saying that like people will do stuff outside, like people will use other, like people, like the defense pact doesn't directly correlate with ILA when they're like explicitly citing in the plan, or like you need a reason why like them citing it and changing custom, like it doesn't effectively change custom in CIL. So it was okay, it was present, like I don't think it's like definitive.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's could be a viable 2R for sure. I definitely will listen to that. I imagine you get to, yeah, probably also, you probably use more of that time to talk about turns case arguments or just like impact comparison stuff that would definitely help you in the again to beat back try or die also.
Good debate.
Thanks, everyone. Best of luck, Michigan.
Good luck, Michigan.
Good tournament.
Yeah, good tournament,
Good luck,
Kentucky.
Michigan.
Good luck next year.